Okay, just clicked record. And welcome to the No Dice, No Glory Roundtable for HMGS CyberCon. I am your moderator, Troy Hill, and I am joined by a lot of folks from Warlord Games today. First hour, I believe we've got Alessio Cavatore with us. And
Hello.
please make sure to turn your camera off and mute your microphone if you are not one of our guest speakers. If you have a question, please type it in the chat, and Mitch will ask the speakers during the Q&A session. Now I'd like to introduce all the folks from Warlord Games, and I'm going to start with Jon Russell. And Jon, would you do a quick round of who's with us this hour?
Hello and welcome everyone to Cyber Wars 2. And thanks again to No Dice, No Glory guys for hosting us here. This first hour we have the great, the wonderful, the mystical Alessio Cavatore. He's with us here today. And we also have Marcus Vine from the Marcus and Max duo that do a lot of bolt action stuff. My compatriot and schemer in arms, Paul Walker, is here also, hanging out in that sunny area of Bermuda as we speak. I'm sorry. Yeah, Bermuda. That's right. And we're here to talk about the first hour stuff for bolt action and other things, unless you might like to dig into, like maybe if we can crack him open and see if we can't talk about combined arms a little bit. We'll see if he's allowed. And we'll talk about the facts and erratas a little bit and anything you might like to. Seems like we got a lot of people in here. So here we are, and this is it. And welcome to the roundtable. How was that?
That was good.
The Knights of the Round Table.
Yeah, there you go. Blue, no green. Ah!
What is coming up from Warlord Games that Alessio can talk about this hour? I understand we've got a big new campaign game about to hit the shelves.
Yes, I did check before this meeting whether I could talk about combined arms. So I did ask the powers that be. And yes, I can talk about combined arms. Not too much detail, but I can certainly give you an idea of what it is. So do you want me to start with that?
Please.
Cool. Basically combined arms. It's a box, which includes effectively two things. There's two things in that box. To a superficial viewer, it's a board game. You go, oh, it's a board game. It's a World War II board game, and there's like little planes and little soldiers and little tanks and factories and things, and plastic stuff and cardboard counters and dice. So it basically looks like a very cool board game that I don't know, is not as big as something like Axis and Allies, but it has a bit of that feel in terms of which frankly I really love, and because this has been designed by Riverhorse with Warlord together, is actually we kind of delved into our experience of doing board games, and so we made this kind of high-level board game, World War II themed, which is not the forces in it are kind of generic. It's not like specifically Germans and Americans or British. It is literally like the Red Army and the Blue Army kind of thing, but of course. Then you can dress it up, and there's cards in it that you do go specific on some specific forces for World War II. So you can actually choose what that army represents. There will be different colors models, different colors plastic. So it's a board game. It's a cool board game you can play as a board game. You can just have fun and play a board game with your friends. And that's one dimension of it. The other dimension is when two armies collide, or or two fleets collide, or there's also basically it's called combined arms because it's got land, air, and sea forces. So you have little airplanes, little ships, and little tanks and infantry. And when two forces come together to battle, you can resolve them within the board game as normal with dice rolls and with the rules of the board game, or indeed you can say, oh, this force here represents X points of bolt action forces, or cruel seas, or indeed blood skies. So you can have either a board game or a campaign system. A campaign system that you can live there and is made so that you can tie it up very quickly. So you have to take a picture, whatever. But the idea is you can use that as a driver for your campaign, and then you resolve the big battles with any you can mix different systems from Warlord, so you can have effectively all your kind of zoom onto the battle, turn it into your wargaming table, and then fight the battle. See the sea engagement, the land engagement, the landing, the front sea to land on using the 25 mil or the other systems. So yeah, it allows you to zoom in and play that if you want. That's roughly what. As I said, I cannot go too much into detail, but there's cards, there's orders, there's you can flavor it up with lots of different things and choose how complex you want the game to be. Does that answer the question? I cannot hear you.
Everybody's amazed, Alessio, of what you're talking about. So, and I think it puts the players in charge, it sounds like, of their campaigns. They can do as big or as small as they want to with the amount of equipment that they have. So they could do anything from Blood Red Skies to Cruel Seas, Victory at Seas, or Bolt Action.
You can certainly choose which. I mean, if you're only into bolt action, maybe you only use the bolt action and stick with the land and air thing. You just use dice rolls from the board game. But the hope is that you have to go, well, actually, with a small fleet, I can actually resolve this with one of the other systems, and in which case you could feel a more complete experience of more in detail experience. You can play with a 2-player. I mean, it's 2-player. It's a 2 factions game, but of course each of the factions could be subdivided, and you can say, like, these counters here I control, these counters here you control, so it's like an allied army. Yeah, it's like, these guys will be Americans here, and these guys here will be British, or another American army, and basically so more players can join in, divided on one of the 2 sides. So yes, you can have multiple players as well.
So, Mitch, it sounds like we're going to have a true air-land battle management system, and we can really have some fun with it.
Yeah. I'm excited for this one. This is a lot of fun. Yeah, and it's combining, like, maybe somebody's favorite games into one little campaign. Mm.
Yeah, what do you know?
That's the hope.
Was this designed with the idea that you could drop it into any gaming club or gaming store and let the players build a campaign more than the board game, so that they are tracking their battles as they go across using the core set of the board game, but more for the people that want the historical, let's work through those steps one at a time. Here's the naval battle, here's the landing, here's the land battle. That's what it's sounding like. Am I on the right track?
Yeah, the feeling that really I wanted to capture, the feeling that we wanted, like I often say, bolt action is, for me, is like getting into very close in, like, you're watching Band of Brothers or Saving Private Ryan kind of thing. But for me, this is that scene in the film, the Longest Day, where you see the operation room, where they have the big table with all the little tokens that are moving around, and then they're reporting to the generals, like, oh look, oh yeah, landing is going well on Utah and Sword. And so we seem to have a problem on Omaha here, and they move in these big things around the table, and then of course the film from there zooms onto the actors on Omaha Beach being shelled and machine gunned and stuff. So you have that feeling of control room, and like you said, the store could be the control room where you have these on the table, etc., and your gamers come in, there's a bit of banter, there's a bit of moves there, etc., and then the owner goes, you have a week to fight this battle, and that battle over there. They came together, tell me the results. Next week, come in, and we'll do another round of this. And therefore, then you have another session of, all right, so I won here, so you retreated. Okay, we'll do this, build some reinforcements, because there's some building of resources and stuff. And it's all, again, it could be just board game points, or you can go literally, this many 100 points of bolt action, regenerating reinforcements, etc. So yeah, you could run it like that, indeed, from the store to leaving the customers to play the actual battles, play out the battles.
Okay, is this designed specifically for European theater, or are you branching out into others?
Well, that was an interesting point, whether how specific we wanted to go, and we kind of went to, because one option would have been to go very detailed with realistic maps or maps of actual places, and one was to go with generic land of, there's an island and some land here. This is a bit of a desert, so go very abstract. What we ended up with was a bit of both. So there's the land masses depicted and the sea are close, very close in some cases, to recognizable geographical locations. So you go, oh, that looks a bit like Normandy, kind of thing. It's like, oh, this looks a bit, I don't know, Okinawa, kind of thing. And you go, right, so you can kind of go, okay, yeah, I can tell more or less what we're talking about. This is like Pacific Island. This is more like European. But we didn't go specifically, literally, this city is that city, because again, complexity we kept as low as possible. We didn't want to go, right, because the moment you start to do as precise as possible, then people, obviously it's very difficult to go, oh, well, that distance, there is no road there. You put a road on the map, you think, oh, there's a river. So we didn't want to be too precise. So it's almost like there's sectors that you can recognize, but it's also because for flexibility, the several maps, and I mean, if the game is successful, we'll make more maps, and how precisely matching real location, we'll see. If the public want more realistic, less realistic, we'll see. But one of the reasons why the maps are generic is that the city is the objective, the airfields, the radar stations, all the various objectives that you capture to win the game are plastic pieces that you can actually position, so that basically when you play the game can be different. You can set up the objectives where they are. So this time we'll put one on this island over here, the small island. So actually, suddenly your navy is very important. If you don't care and don't want to play with the navy, you want to focus on the land battle, you go, well, don't put an objective on the island. I put the objective here on the coast, for example. So that navy is still important, but not vital. So it becomes more of an option as opposed to a must-have. So to allow that level of customization, we went for half between realistic and a little bit generic.
So it sounds like that if this is popular, ladies and gentlemen, there might be modules later on down the line that you could work on or do PDFs for. Maybe, I'm just saying.
Is that an educated guess, or come on, John? We know we can shake you down.
Well, it's again, like Alessio said, anytime we do something like this at Warlord, it's up to the public to tell us where to go after we put it out there. Yeah, exactly. Drink more. So, and you've all seen that. I mean, Bolt Action is an excellent example that we put out that game Bolt Action now 10 years ago. My God, it's been around 10 years, I think. And yeah, I know it's got to be. And look what we've done with it. How many books do we have out there? How many campaign things? Because people and other people out in the world have a passion for certain areas. So who's to say that we can't do? I mean, it would be fabulous to do Guadalcanal in this combined arms idea. It would be fantastic to do Stalingrad. It would be fantastic to do, D-Day itself. I mean, there's so many things we could do with it in little modules. And you public have seen that we do. Sometimes we'll do just PDFs online, or Marcus and Max will have spark something in your guys's when they do something, and you go, oh man, that sounds cool. And you guys run down these rabbit holes. I mean, look at Operation Chariot. Now we have Cruel Seas models for Operation Chariot because people kind of like that. So this is just a doorway to your hobby to go down those rabbit holes and then manage something later. So this is phenomenal. I mean, it'd be great, Alessio. I'm really reminded of the day that me and Brian were off a year ago in December, and you guys were playing this in your guys' office with little paper chits that Matt, and you're trying to come up with something. I'm very excited the end result from that.
It looks very pretty.
Is anybody else having a hard time hearing John?
Yeah, we have. I think
John
we've
is
lost his
lagging.
video.
Yeah.
Am
He moves around so much.
I'd just like to say that's not a bad thing necessarily.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Sorry,
We
did
can
I
hear
say
from
that
somebody
out loud?
else.
Sorry, lads.
Yeah.
Mute my mic.
Yeah, I'm done.
It might be worth adding in that it would be nice if down the road we could get that to connect with an online scoring system which came back to Warlord, so we could track something globally.
Yeah, an online campaign would be fantastic to run with that, absolutely, and it has been discussed. like the expansions, of course, being that it's a board game, like often happens, we developed a lot of stuff, maps and stuff, and then of course you have to choose what goes into the box, because obviously you want the box to be a relatively accessible price point. You don't put everything into the box, so potentially you have some more decks of cards to represent different armies or different forces within armies. So but the potential for expansion is there, and obviously we'll see how well received it is, and if it is, we have stuff that we can add for sure.
This might be a good time to segue into the upcoming and still unknown tournament scene for Bolt Action that Paul and John are running. Will run if we ever get unlocked down. So one of you guys want to take over and tell us what's coming up on the Bolt Action tourney scene?
It's I'm kicking this one to Paul because everybody's heard my voice enough. So it's your turn. Go, Paul.
Go, Paul. The tournament scene. We've developed something running in North America over 10 sectors. So we've divided the landmass up into 10 sectors, 2 in Canada, and therefore 8 in the United States. And we're going to have regional competitions in each of those sectors, which will come together fairly logically in a national competition, basically guided by Warlord. We're going to have different event types. So we've got 4 event types. The main event type is what we're going to call the organized standard. And the organized standard basically covers everything which isn't going to be tournament style, if you like. And I see that anyway as the sort of major part. And then we have the tournament style, which everybody's starting to get excited about. And we're going to break that down into bronze standard, silver standard, and gold standard. So the bronze standard will be events of maybe up to approximately 12 players, silver standard events up to approximately 24 players. Warlord will be supporting those events with prize support and tournament medals, etc. And then the gold standard is going to be the top end regional, international, national type competitions, and we've put into place some guidelines for people to follow if they want to be supported by Warlord Games supported play. Let's see, so we've got 4 documents. One document will cover general events, so we're expecting this to branch out into the other Warlord systems, such as Blood Red Skies, K47, that type of thing. We have a referee's handbook, so that's to give guidance on to how to deal with situations which may arise in your competitions. Hopefully they never will, but you'll have a little bit of structure and consistency as to how tournaments are provided to the public and how that they're policed and controlled, just to give that wee bit of consistency between events that go on. And we'll also have 12 competitive scenarios for Bolt Action. And we also have a specific Bolt Action tournament document setting out all the guidelines for the different standards. Apart from Gold Standard, where we have some, I wouldn't say stringent, but we have some certain standards we want people to stick to for the real top end, for those players that are into the real cut and thrust of competition. But apart from that, bronze, silver, organized, we let TOs pretty much decide within certain very loose guidelines what they're going to do. It's not about Warlord telling you how to play your games. It's about us trying to guide you and give you a little bit of structure. And for the top end players, who are a very small percentage, really, I would guess, of the fan base for Warlord games, to give them a bit of consistency. Where do we get to? So also in that, we're introducing what we're calling play styles and competition styles, so that when tournament organizers and stores are advertising their events, people who are going to come to those events have got some sort of an idea of what to expect. So by play style, we're going to label events that are Warlord Games supported play supported. We're going to be relaxed, formal, or premier. So relaxed is basically bring all your toys, put them on the table. We're not too bothered if they're painted or not, and we're not really too bothered if you know the rules or not. You're here to get into the game and expand your knowledge and have a lot of fun. Formal events, you've played a few games, perhaps, you know a bit more of the rules. There's going to be more players of that type there. And then at premier events, you're going to turn up and expect that these guys know the rules inside out, and they're there for a bit of cut and thrust at the hard end. And that way, hopefully we'll steer away from people turning up to an event and it being totally opposite to their kind of preferred style of play, as it suggests. And we're going to also have competition style. There's going to be, at the moment, basic competition and advanced competition. And again, this relates to, you know, how serious are these guys going to be about the rules, etc., and, you know, winning prizes, etc. Nothing wrong with that. But if you're not totally into just winning for the sake of winning, we've got something there for you, and we want you to go to those events so you get the maximum pleasure out of your hobby and out of Warlord games. Also, all of these things I mentioned at the moment, including the sectors, etc., are going to remain fairly flexible. The documents we envisage to be what people call living documents. So those documents will go up on the newly developing Warlord Games community site for tournaments and events. And as we see that they need changed, we will change those as we go, rather than waiting for specific times to change them, you know, once a year or whatever that would be. So if we see something needs changed, or we've got, you know, a good suggestion comes up, we can just go ahead and change those documents. And like the play styles, competition styles, etc., we can change, we can add, we can take away, exactly the same as with the competitive scenarios. Those are suggested as being more appropriate for your tournaments, but we will add, take away, change, make improvements as time goes on, and we can do those as and when we want to, rather than waiting for specific times in the calendar to do that. Also with that, we'll be tying up with Easy Army. Most of you guys will know Greg at Easy Army and his fantastic software, and I would encourage you all to donate to his good works. But we're working closely now with Greg to make sure that the Easy Army software is up to date and accurate. And therefore we can then, once that happens, recommend it to all tournament organizers as the army builder of choice, if you like. And that will come into play and be integrated into the Best Coast Pairings tournament software system, which is, for those of you that don't know, it's a software that tournament organizers and players can enter competitions. They can upload their army lists on your phone as well. Thank you, John, for the prompts. It's free software, and we've got the developers developing it so that it's bolt action friendly at the moment. Shortly, Blood Red Skies and K47 will come online, as will the other systems as we go through them. And that will allow us to take in results in live time, make sure that for those that are going to qualify for regional competitions and for national competitions, and ultimately be invited to come to the Warlord GT, that those are done automatically in a much more efficient way than has happened in the past. It might also allow us to work with Alessio's new game Combined Arms in conjunction with Warlord, and allow us to run global campaigns a bit more easily and in ways that perhaps we hadn't envisaged before. And seeing as I've stunned John into silence, I'm hoping I've covered everything, because stunning John into silence doesn't happen very often.
Well, actually, one question I have is,
yeah,
how much do you expect this to grow the game? There was always been a healthy number of bolt action tournaments around. And if I go to stores, I always see guys playing. So I've never had a problem getting a game. How much do you think this is going to pull bolt action into that tournament heavy scene?
Well, and speaking of tournament heavy scenes, I'm going to let Paul answer that, but let's talk with Marcus. I don't know if a lot of you guys know who Marcus is, but if you listen to Marcus's voice, you'll probably recognize him because he's one of the triple threat that we have in our customer service. And he's on Twitch a lot with Max, and he is the man, the myth, the legend that takes care of a lot of our questions along with Lorenzo and Marcus and Max. So, Marcus, how do you think this would, since you've been doing a lot of the tournament stuff up there in Europe, how do you think this will help you over there spread the hobby?
So it's a really good question. I think obviously kind of the US tournament scene does seem to be a little bit different from the British tournament scene. I think simply because of distance and sheer numbers. Obviously in the UK, we've just completely lost the tournament scene this year, which is a massive blow. Normally, we'd be doing as kind of representatives of Warlord, me, Max, and my colleague Nick would be going to sort of maybe 4 or 5 tournaments a year, kind of flying the flag, bringing some support down, and we'd be playing in those tournaments and just being a presence. And it's kind of that stamp of, yes, Warlord thinks you're doing a good job with your tournament. The problem is there's only 3 of us and we can only be in so many places at once. Having this system in place whereby we can really encourage people, we can encourage tournaments to run in a certain way that that's in line with our values as a company and what the kind of gaming that we like, because we're all gamers. That's going to really help, and it's also, I think, going to make it more beneficial and easier for a store to run tournaments. If they've kind of thought, well, we could do it, but we've got to sort prizes out, we've got to sort certificates out. That's a lot of legwork to do, because I've done it for just for a couple of tournaments. We've made up the prize support. And it takes a little while to work it out. So if there's that readily available, basically a plug and play system, I think that's going to be massively beneficial. And obviously if stores are advertising it, then people are going to come. And if people are coming, they're going to be talking to their stores and going, hey, you should get on this. So I think overall it's going to be really useful, actually.
And Marcus has been rather quiet about the boxes and boxes and boxes that are stacked in his office that support this. One of the things that Paul and Marcus had talked about is Warlord has in place a tournament packet that the stores can order on their trade form that gives them the certificates, gives them a little bit of an incentive, some prizes. For example, Lesio's famous 17-pounder inflatable shells. There's 2 of those in that packet for your prizes. There's some. This being the first season, we've called it the Blitzkrieg season. So there's some challenge coins. There's 3 challenge coins in that box of bronze, silver, and gold that have our logo and then Blitzkrieg on the front. This change as we do each season, and then also the much wanted and very lusted after silver order dice that you can only get when you go to these events. There's only 16 in the box, so usually, yeah, I know you want some, Mitch. The first 16 players who sign up will, exactly. We'll get a dice, so you'll get 1 dice. So the more you go to, the bigger your silver dice pile will come. And so we've got those in place. And one of the questions we've been running into a lot that me and Paul have to field is, well, what can we use for our army lists? In the silver and bronze level, we're not capping it. You can do whatever you want. You can use a narrative play. You can use a campaign. You can use the Warsaw Uprising Polish Army. We don't care. It's to have fun. At the gold level and the high and the upper standard, we're going to go generic. That's where we go army lists or only generics. Just because when you get to that level, it's more about the player than the army. It's about the generalship of the person. So again, what we're trying to do is make this whole tournament scene with Bolt Action first, then Blood Red Skies, then probably K-47 and others. You can pick and go wherever you want to. So now you have a plethora of options to play your army. You can tweak it, you can play with it, you can build, and it just makes you start exploring your army and your army list a little bit more.
Got a question that came in, and Creighton asked, this also reflects my own local situation here. Is there a minimum cap on number of participants for sanctioned events? Because some of our areas here in the U.S. are rather rural, and when people start looking at a 3-hour drive to go hit a tournament, at the next local game store over,
Sure.
we're running into problems. We're getting those 6 to 8 player tourneys, not the 10
Right.
to 20.
Right, and it's supported that
You froze, John.
more holier than. Oh, is that better now? Don't move. I don't know what's going
Perhaps
on over
I'll
here.
take that one over then. So,
Yeah,
unless
go
John
ahead.
comes
It's
in and
yours.
unless John comes in and corrects me, there's really something for everybody. So, with the standards as we have them set up, anybody really could qualify for the organized standard. And then bronze standard is up to 12 competitions. So the ones you're specifically talking would really be covered by bronze standard as such. So the answer is yes, Warlord Games is happy to support people almost at any level, I would say. You know, if you want to fall in line, if you want to do something completely different and you don't want Warlord Games support to play support, it's really not a problem. We're after people to enjoy the game. And coming back to the previous question, we didn't design this to try and sell more Warlord product as such, although that would be nice. We're a company after all. It was approached from the point of view as we want people to enjoy gaming more. And this was something we've been asked for, is to come up with some guidelines to make things more organized, make things have more structure and a little bit more consistency, but at the same time giving TOs, you know, that leeway to kind of do what they want.
Okay, that's a good answer.
Thought I'd stunned you all into silence again there for a moment.
It's your
Well,
dulcet
The Scottish
tones.
accent. It must be
That's
the
it.
accent.
Just trying to figure out where to go next here. Since we're on tourney, the big question is going to be what's coming down the pike in FAQs. What can we expect? When can we see another FAQ coming for bold action?
To you, Alessio.
Well, the process is a continuous process. We have now go to a place where we do it fairly regularly. Well, whereby before we tended to do it a bit ad hoc, kind of like, I don't know, maybe turn up once a year, something like that. But now it seems what we are aiming for is roughly a quarterly release. Then obviously the COVID thing didn't make it easier to get together, test things, and I meet with Marcus, Max. They kick my ass at games, and basically we discuss how to answer FAQs, how to approach all the customer support, and the guys definitely tend to answer the questions. We agreed on what the philosophy is about answering customer support questions, and then if there's something that actually seems genuinely a thing there, the rule book or the army books don't actually answer, there's a contradiction, there's an issue, then eventually the guys will let me know. I will come up with a solution and publish it in the next FAQ and errata. That's the process. Quarterly, did we manage to make it quarterly like we are intending to recently?
Originally it was quarterly, Alessio, but as you say, COVID came in, so we don't have really the amount of feedback that we were getting. So it's kind of slowed up naturally because there's not that much to report back.
So we aim at doing it quarterly. Obviously, giant cataclysm, global scales, things get in the way. But the aim here is to try to do a regular. If it's not quarterly, we think maybe that's too often. Maybe we do it, every 6 months or something like that. But the idea is to have a constant review of all the FAQs, and particularly, the one that came up quite a lot recently, of course, is Tiger Fear, and that was
I wasn't mentioning it.
Oh, here we go.
It's a very interesting thing because obviously, like many of these things, you have a lot of people telling you one thing and a lot of people telling you another thing, and you're kind of stuck in between and kind of go, yeah. But what was interesting of the process, and of the process that is still ongoing, is we made a certain tweak to Tiger Fear. Maybe the pendulum was swung too far the other way. Then we counter tweak it, etc. So we're trying to get it to a place where the majority of feedback will be, yeah, all right, it works, as opposed to at the moment, obviously, you have a very different opinion on the matter, depending who you ask. Anyway, it would be interesting to get into the details of it, but this should be a good rule for very expensive tanks, but it's not a very good rule for cheap tanks. And unfortunately, that is true mechanically in rules terms. However, the whole point of the rule is that the cheap tanks were mistaken for expensive tanks. So it's kind of like the two things, the historical reason for the rule and the actual game mechanics are a bit of a. So anyway, it's an interesting process. We will keep listening. We'll keep trying to, Marcus and Max will bang heads again and go, what do you think we should do here? Kind of thing. Well, let's try this way. Oh, like you're saying, a thing that has missed a lot is that often we have those conversations, then we try them on the field, because obviously there is no substitute to actually play the things. But that has missed a bit. So it's like, well, we can't really. I mean, Tabletop Simulator should be an answer to that, I guess. But we're trying to, play testing is still a hard thing to do these days. For a while, hopefully not for too long, but hey, we'll see. So yeah, ongoing, reviewed every 6 months, maybe 3 months, 6 months, depending, and constantly updated.
Well, if I can jump in and put a bug in your ear for something that one of our local guys really loves, now that we've got Big Red Skies coming out with all these wonderful 1/72nd scale aircraft, I suspect we're going to see a lot of those starting to hit the table, but there's no aircraft rule specifically for Bold Action version 2. There's the old system that was kind of an add-on from version 1. We've got a few guys local that like to play with those. Is that something, I don't know if this is coming up in the Marcus discussions or not, but how likely is something like that to hit Bold Action even through an errata in the upcoming future, since we've got the planes and we've got old rules that are a little out of balance? Can we make them, updated and come in?
Oh, that's it's an interesting one. I mean, those airplane or warplane rules, the PDF thing that we did, was always being intended to be definitely not, like you said, a bolt-on, something that is added because at the scale of Bolt Action, obviously the problem of what you're playing is a platoon level game. Having aircraft that effectively are not an abstract thing, but they're actually models on the table, it really jars a lot with the scale, because that's a fact. Because obviously something like that would be on the table for a fraction of a second, and so it really is difficult to imagine dogfighting. So it's a strange mix of very abstract rules with the more accurate rules that you have on the table, where a model is a model and it's there, but actually the plane coming in is not really here or there. It is in and out in a second. So it's not something that we had plans to do big things with at the moment. But of course, with these new models coming in, etc., then I'm sure the pressure will be turned on let's do something with this, right? As is often the case. And it's an interesting thing. We'll certainly pick it up with the brass of Warlord and see whether there's an interest of trying to, for example, resurrect that. As far as I know, it's never gone away, the warplane PDF, because it's effectively an add-on, a completely optional thing that if people want to play with, it's fine, but it's certainly not balanced. It's certainly not. Also, planes themselves, the weaponry of those things is often, it was quite quite remarkable in what they can do on the table. And but anyway, basically, there's a problem of scale. There's a big problem of scale and how to interact with that level of scale. At the moment, there is no new thing in the immediate future, but if their interest is there, of course we'll do something with it.
Well, fortunately, we've got the Big Red Skies, Blood Red Skies, Airstrike. We can get the guys into that in the meantime. So is there anything else, Jon Russell, Paul Walker, Marcus, anybody that we haven't covered yet that we should be covering with all things Bold Action and the campaign games?
Well, the only thing I'd say is, and Alessio kind of mentioned it earlier, is because of the situation that we're living in, there's some alternatives that you can play. Tabletop Simulator does have a Bolt Action option. Alessio's played it with some of the guys from Snafu, and they had a ball. And there's ways to play the game safely, and there's ways to do conventions safely, not on the grand scale that we're used to, but there are some 80 to 100 man tournaments when the guidelines and the regulations are there. If you just follow them, you can do it. And we've got some really exciting things coming out with we've announced the second of 3 books for the D-Day landings. This is going to be covering the British and the Canadians. So there's a lot of buzz about that. There's talk of we're going to start doing another starter set. We've got the Band of Brothers starter set, but now we're talking about maybe doing something for so watch for that coming out here pretty soon. And there's a lot. Everybody always says, "Oh, there's nothing they can cover in bolt action." Well, we've been up for around 10 years, and we haven't covered all of these 6 years or 6-year war, depending upon how you want to say when it started. It's still out there. And Mark wasn't again. The level of, okay, I'll slow down. I think Marcus has seen when he goes out there, the level of modeling and painting every year goes up. I mean, it amazes me, some of these people. I mean, one guy did his whole army around LO, had the little house with a radio inside of it, and it was a resistance army, but it was phenomenal. I mean, I'm sure, Marcus, you could talk about some of the stuff you've seen.
Yeah, I mean, it's honestly one of my favorite things about going out and doing the tournaments and, speaking on Twitch and and especially in customer service, being directly customer facing, myself, Max, New Connor, and obviously the boss, Lorenzo. When people interact with Warlord, we're the people they tend to interact with, unless they're coming to our store. And that means that we get kind of the whole gamut of their hobby experience from, them finding exactly the right thing for them and, us helping them get exactly what they want, whether that's, a custom deal or whatever, to them then kind of, can I get a bit of advice on this? And then finally, we, quite often we'll get people sending us, hey, I've just finished this army. And it is honestly the most rewarding thing. But you're absolutely right, out there, and especially in the tournament scene, the standard of painting is so high that we get to see. And I think it's that competition. 90% of tournaments that I've ever been to have a painting competition attached to them. And guys want to win that just as much, if not more sometimes, as they want to win the actual tournament. And it's really nice sometimes to kind of remember what the true building block of this hobby is, at least from my point of view, which is really cool miniatures. Theoretically, we could be playing this with clothes pegs painted up in certain colors, but we don't. We choose to play it with miniatures that we want to build and we want to paint because we love that and we think it's cool. So yeah, it's certainly one of the upsides of getting to get out and about in the community is you get to see all this work, and it has just gone up so much, new techniques and everything.
And I think I would say, and I think Marcus hit the nail on the head. And I'm going to steal this line from Tony Reiger. You come for the game and you stay for the community. And a lot of people will come to these events, but then they start talking to people and they find out that the guy lives 2 miles down the road. So they can play a lot more. So that's what helps build this whole hobby as a community. And I didn't mean to cut you off, Mitch. Go ahead.
No. I'm used to it from interviewing you many times. You actually brought up something interesting, and it was what I talked to the Lead Pursuit guys about yesterday. We have COVID. It sucks. I miss the community of this game, but I am still painting miniatures like a fiend because I know one day this will end, and I'm going to go out and play. But you brought up about Tabletop Simulator. I've been looking to pick up another army so I could demo in bolt action because my Canadians and Poles need somebody to play against. And I looked through the Germans, the Italians, and I actually have my shopping list of stuff I plan to get for that. So I think TTS helps grow the game, and myself, Doug, and Brett talked about that yesterday. It is. Look, we are miniatures gamers, and I think, especially what Marcus just said and what you just said, John, is we're not going to stop playing miniatures and play on the computer. We play for the community. We go to events. I think we're missing events severely right now, but to me, TTS is what's keeping my bolt action interest going. And Black Powder, I got to be honest, full Black Powder army, never played it. somebody's showing me how to play now on TTS. So my 328 millimeter Napoleonics are not enough. I need to do American Civil War. Now I need to do these things. So you guys are growing the game by preaching to the converted, by putting a great substitute out there. So I think it's kind of cool that you guys see that and understand that it's growing things.
A question about, can you explain what tabletop simulator is? On the chat.
Oh,
well, Roland.
Yeah, well, I could explain it, or John, but Tabletop Simulator is kind of a open sandbox that you can find on Steam. The initial program is about $20. You know, it was funny, before COVID it was on sale for $7. That you go in and it's all stuff that's produced by the community. And you could go in, if you just do a simple search for Bolt Action, you could see by downloading all these armies. And actually, we did a video of how to do it on No Dice, No Glory, and we have a whole article on it. And just go to nodicenoGlory.com, and I think if you do a search for Tabletop Simulator, or just hit us up on our Facebook page, and I will direct you. But it takes some work. It's not like you show up and it's plug and play. You got to set up the table. But one of our guys showed the rest of our staff how to play Bolt Action, and they went out and bought a ton of Bolt Action stuff. So hopefully you guys are seeing some sales from that.
On a side note there, you can also do it on Roll20. I've got some guys in California that we get together once a month and play Bolt Action on Roll20. It's not as smooth and as graphic oriented as Tabletop Sim is. It's top down only, but it's doable. It's just a matter of get out there, find a way to get with your buddies and play some games.
It's worth mentioning there's also an Order Dice app out there, which I believe is still free at the moment. So for these times, it's a handy thing. Also pretty handy if you forget your Order Dice or lose them. So if somebody wants to contact me, I can put them in touch with the link for that.
Yeah, do just want to kind of plug as well. It'd be remiss of me if I didn't come on, and Max would never forgive me if I didn't. Obviously, if people are looking to get, people are missing gaming, because I know I am, and are missing that, really, especially missing the community chat, as we've mentioned, just that everyday back and forth and the banter and the talking about the game and modeling. There's so many really good kind of podcasts and streams out there. Obviously, hello, hopefully we're one of them. And that's, we call it Monday Musings with Max and Marcus. And it is just myself and my colleague and my very good friend of many years, Max. And every Monday for a couple of hours, goes live at 7 p.m. GMT, so 7 p.m. British time, which is normally pretty convenient for the States, I think. We tried to make it convenient for both sides of the pond. But that is just kind of hobby chat. Sometimes when we're able to, we'll play games. We've played a couple of games on the stream live before, which people really enjoyed. Kind of with a focus mostly on Bolt Action, but we will branch out into other areas. And we really enjoy the little bit of community we've got there with the people interacting with us in the chat as well. So obviously, if anyone's watching that and is at a loose end as of Monday evening or Monday afternoon, come down and say hi. Everyone's, again, shocked silence while they digest that absolute revelation.
Well, you got the Twitch, and you got No Dice, No Glory, you got Snafu, you've got there's a Juggernaut, Juggers. Yeah, you gotta love the Juggers, and sometimes it's an hour, sometimes it's 3 hours. But what's great about them is you can pause as you paint, as you do your thing, and there's ways to get that itch scratched, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Oh, looks like Andy's in. Looks like we got Andy Chambers in. Hello, Andy.
Getting ready for the second hour of fun. So it's going to be interesting. You invited so many of the staff from Warlord. I want to see if they outnumber the folks that are watching. And by all means, if you guys want to pretend we're not here and have a production meeting of what's coming out over the next year, I think everybody here will be in agreement of not saying anything. Because these guys look trustworthy, don't they?
Yeah,
I think I
Welcome,
can speak
Andy.
for
It's us
Warlord in
girls.
saying we're flattered you think there's that much organization.
Yeah.
No, I've worked with a lot of game companies. It's not there. I get it. Every time you see something hit a shelf, a little miracle happened.
Exactly.
Amen.
Oh yeah.
An angel
Alessio-
gains its wings.
Yeah, Alessio, if you want to stay, I mean, that'd be fantastic. But if you've got things to do, you're certainly allowed to run away. But I mean,
I have some Warlord work to do, which I cannot talk about. The super secret Warlord. So I think I will pass the baton to Andy, the game designer baton to Andy, and bow out then.
well, thanks for coming, Alessio. I really appreciate it. And as always, about friendship we talk about. Thanks.
You're very welcome. It was good fun. Speak later.
And on that bombshell, I shall also bid a fond goodbye.
Oh, hello, Max.
I'm actually on
Marcus.
shift. Oh, come on, Max is the one with the beard and no hair. I'm
Sorry,
the one with
Max
the
is
hair
a
and
good
no
looking
beard.
one. I forget.
Yeah. But he's good looking because the mustache covers more of his face.
Exactly. Well, thanks, Marcus. I really appreciate it. Again, you are and the rest of your crew are what make us great because of the fantastic, award-winning customer service you guys give us.
Hey,
Well,
and before you go, Marcus, we'd love to have you on a podcast sometime to kind of,
Yeah,
you know.
easiest way to do that, mate. We're more than happy to do that. If you drop an email to info@warlordgames.com, that's the central customer service line. And what then me and Max will do, if you just address it for the attention of Marcus and Max, we'll pick it up and we'll open a channel and get it all rolling, mate.
So you don't have an SKU. I could just order you directly from the website.
So I'm actually cast to order. So you can order me, but at the moment, obviously with COVID, we've had to kind of stop doing special orders like that. So probably late January, you could probably get one of me, but for now, I'm off limits.
Take care. Have a great weekend, Marcus.
Thank you. You too. Bye, everyone.
All right, everyone. We have the man, the myth, the legend, Andy Chambers, and Steve Morgan now is away, is joined us as well. But Andy's got some exciting stuff he wants to talk about, of course, as always. And Andy, it's great to see you.
Wow, nice setup. Thank you. Thank you. What was I going to talk about? I was going to talk about Blood Red Skies, of course, because that's always foremost in my mind. And the next 2000 AD game that we've got coming down the pipe, which is Slain Kiss My Axe. What would people like to hear about first? Don't let me dictate your agenda to you, after all.
Better go with the Blood Red Skies.
Okay. Blood Red Skies, we are currently, I know Paul is currently working through the midway stuff through the studio. We've been checking punch boards and cards and things like that of late. So I don't know when the date is due for that, but I know that in terms of my work schedule, it's the most imminent thing. I'm imagining we'll probably get an Easter release on that now, but who's to say? Other people who, of the numerous Warlord workers here, may know more than me. But in addition to that, we've been doing a lot of extra additional aircraft because we're going to doing things on direct sale, as well as shipping things directly to stores, and that's allowed a quite a large expansion to the range to go off. In amongst which we're working on Italians at the moment for a release to do the Italian Air Force, kind of like as a chunk. So we're going to do, I think it's 5 different Italian planes, an expansion pack to go with them to cover 6 more planes that we aren't doing, for people who want to expand out by 3D printing or what have you. And some aces. I've actually been looking at Italian aces recently, which are a fantastic bunch overall. They're everything you could hope for from Italian aces. They're very flamboyant. So yeah, we've just been working through doing the aces for those. And we're covering the kind of the main bases in terms of the releases. It's mostly single engine fighters, but of course we've got the triple engined bomber, the SM-79, which is very kind of like iconic for the Italian Air Force. And I was surprised actually, they're a very good Air Force. They kind of get underrated because more than anything else, they had production problems and pilot training problems. as most of the Axis Air Forces did later in the war, but they started off very strong, and they've got some good planes in their setup. So that's going to make it a really interesting expansion, because it's effectively a whole new faction to play with. And they got around a bit as well, Eastern Front. Interestingly enough, some of their stuff was sold on and used by the Japanese as well in China and so on. So it's a good little expansion in its own right. Other than that, we've got a Meteor coming for the Brits, so they'll have their jet at last. In the realms of big planes, we're looking at a Heinkel 111 for the Germans, to see if we can actually get resin casting to work on planes that large, and that'll be a big step forward as well, that we can start getting into multi-engine planes more with the resin casting. So a lot going off basically for Blood Red Skies. I have no idea what the schedules for the releases for these kind of things are. They'll just be staging forward as we go. So that was my Blood Red Skies stuff. Any questions about that from the floor?
We don't have any from the floor, but it's all right. I'll ask you a bunch. The Italians also were involved in the Battle of Britain.
Yes.
And, I remember during...
Briefly, it must be said, but yes.
Very briefly. And I remember during my time in NATO, and I was talking to the Portuguese, and I go, "You guys are the bravest pilots." And he goes, "Why do you say that?" And I go, "Because you fly those planes." The same could be said for the Italians. I'm excited for them. As you guys were doing the research on the Italians and their aces and some of their aircraft, what was kind of the most remarkable thing you found that, hey, I didn't really know this before?
That they had some really, really good war fighters, much like the Japanese. Basically, they had some decent airframes already, but often the engines were a bit lackluster and so forth. But later on in the war, they basically started doing license-built Daimler-Benz engines, and they produced some amazing fighters from them. Every bit as good as your Spitfires or your Mustangs or anything like that. The problem was they only built a few hundred, as opposed to thousands of their opposing flyers. So it was kind of that of and I say they had some very good pilots. They were well trained. A lot of them were veterans of the Spanish Civil War and stuff like that. So it was once again this story of Axis getting crushed by overwhelming Allied air power, of too many pilots, too many planes to fight. But they fought boldly with what they could. And then you've also got this interesting sort of division point with the armistice with Italy, where they split, and some of them carry on flying with the North, and some of them join the Allied co-belligerent air force in the South.
I was going to ask about that.
Yeah.
Are we going to see that in the game, or?
I haven't really sort of bent my mind to how that'll work out, because as I understand it, the co-belligerent air force mainly transferred onto flying Allied planes. So it's more of a painting and decal solution than anything else at that point. We might, do an ace or something like that to help illustrate it. Whereas the northern ones, some of them started flying German planes almost exclusively, but they also sort of had the rump of those sort of nice late production fighters, and they used those up until they ran out of them and spare parts for them, basically. So that's kind of more of an ongoing concern, the Northern Air Force, the fascist Air Force. But it'd be certainly interesting to look into the Allied co-belligerent Air Force, because I think they ended up in Thunderbolts and stuff like that.
I'd be remiss if I didn't take the moment real quick to introduce Mr. Steve Morgan. I don't know if you folks know him, but when Andy alludes to something come out, he doesn't know when the schedule is. Steve would be the one to poke those questions at, of course, but he is in charge of our trade division in Warlord Games. Hello, Steve. Good seeing you again.
Steve, who had a brush with death earlier this week, it must be said.
Yes, hello, yes. Good to be around. Hello, Andy, again.
Hello.
Seems like only yesterday we're on a Zoom call. Yes. Car incidents aside, yes, I'm good. It's good to be here. Thank you for that, John. You set me up with undoubtedly a load of awkward questions. My job mostly is to make sure that we take care of our customers through the web store, and also anybody who carries our product in any of the 1,000 stores across about 55 countries we deal with, do so in a manner that fits in with their business model, and hopefully they're happy to deal with us. That's ultimately my responsibility. Part of that is agreeing release dates with the studio when they can produce stuff and when it's best for our stores to actually have it in market, which sometimes is a tug of war in two opposite directions. But you know, we try to get there in the end. But I mean, I've got a list of what we're working on going out probably over the next 5 or 6 months. Some of it's can be fairly detailed, some of it's pretty broad brush. I'm not sure whether you want to kick off with that right away. Me to quickly rattle through it. Yes, Mitch is nodding. No.
Well, you know, usually, look, anytime we do Warlord, we just try not to piss John off because he kind of, you know, just rambles. But I do have a question that came up just now for Blood Red Skies, if we can get to that real quick.
Yep.
And it's from Phil. And he goes, we've heard already that BRS will eventually be part of the new Warlord tournament plans. Will there be tournament-specific BRS rules and or card restrictions? And I guess that would be for you, Mr. Chambers.
Yeah, we've outlined the basics in Airstrike, if you've seen that, which puts some basic restrictions on squadron building and so on. And I'd see that as being an ongoing process. I mean, I got those restrictions from the community, and you know, I want to carry on hearing back from them about what they want to see on that front. And yeah, because I'll always be producing new cards, there'll doubtless be new ones that need to be restricted because they're too good. And yeah, that's an ongoing concern for us. I'm very happy to make sure there's a tournament set of rules. What I do not want to do is try and turn BRS into a tournament set of rules in totality. I think that card restrictions and a few basic sort of like within these parameters, you know, try not to show up with 10 aces in really bad planes and stuff like that is sufficient. So yeah, I don't know what Warlord's tournament plans actually entail at the moment. Whatever they were, we can all safely say they've been rather upset by this year.
That's I gotta agree, Andy. We have been working really close with the folks over at Lead Pursuit. You know, Doug, Brett, and Chris, and now Steve. And we did do a test at in Indianapolis in September with the first physical gathering of Eagles, and we had a quick little tournament pack. The rounds were an hour each. There was some limits on the size. I think it was 100 points for the composition, and there was some doctrines. I think it was doctrine specific. No, it was theater specific. They had 4 different tables with
I
each
remember,
4 different.
I saw the tournament pattern they did for that. Yeah, and they basically set up your theatre cards according to the tables and so on.
Yeah,
which is cool.
It went.
That's a good way of doing it.
Yeah, it went really quick, and we're going to do another test again on the 5th of December at our Mythic Studio Warlord store in Randolph, New Jersey on the 5th. Steve Toth will be there, and they're going to do another test. Far, it seems to be working well. As Steve knows, we have a Blood Guys. Did I freeze again?
Yeah, you're breaking up. You may want to shut your camera off so we don't have to see that beautiful face of yours, and maybe we'll hear him better. But actually, I have a question for all you guys. We've talked a lot about COVID. COVID's kind of hurting the tournament scene, yet I still see the games growing. As on the developer side, other than people playing the games regularly, what are you guys seeing as some of the big problems you've had to overcome since COVID in development and production?
The biggest difference is it took us a while to get to terms with looking after so many people who work for us. Over in the UK, the initial lockdown was a little bit frantic, shall we say, and we closed everything. We just shut down. And we gradually came to terms with opening bits of the facility back up after 2 or 3 weeks of nobody being there. But a lot of people were furloughed for 2 or 3 months. And when we did get back, it came to light that there were quite a lot of people who could quite happily work from home. But we have a lot of our business is making stuff and sending stuff out the door. That can't be done from home. So the biggest challenge we had was doing that safely for our staff, because we have probably about 85 of them on site. And we've ended up having to move location, which we probably had to do anyway because we're a growing business, but we had to accelerate that. So part of the hold up or some of the delays with what we've been trying to do over the last probably 6 months has not only been COVID, but dealing with COVID while trying to move to a new premises to make sure that all our staff are looked after and we can actually cope with what we want to do. From a design point of view, Paul's got most of his guys, I say, working from home because you can still do stuff on the computer and work from home. The biggest challenge we've had is production and manufacturing. And luckily, we've got a production and manufacturing guy who's pretty switched on when it comes to health and safety and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, knows his business.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that was great because a lot of people don't understand, like they're stuck home and they're like, hey, you know, what about this? I want this. And they don't realize that you guys are stuck home too, now for a second time. But yeah, we definitely missed the tournament scene. It seems like people are still buying a lot of stuff to paint.
Yeah, the hobby, the hobby stuff is doing spectacularly well at the moment because people want something to turn to make themselves feel good. You know, if people are going through a difficult time, they want something reassuring and pleasant. I personally have painted a heck of a lot. I've painted more in the last 6 months than I have probably in the previous 2 years combined. And that's across the board. That's this will probably please Andy, a ridiculous amount of Japanese and American planes, an obscene amount of pike and shot stuff, a ridiculous amount of Napoleonics. I'm kind of just looking back here at this madness going on behind me. And I think a lot of people are in the same situation. We found that people contacting our customer service team and people getting in touch with us online increased enormously from March onwards because you know people are stuck at home. They want reassurance that everything's okay, and they want reassurance that we'll be able to look after them. And you know, and luckily we've got a really good customer service team headed up by Lorenzo. I believe Marcus and Max were on here earlier, and those guys are doing a great job coping with it. Yeah,
my painting list is now down to the point where I can start making terrain. So yeah, I can't.
Okay, that's serious.
I can't do another lockdown. But yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to getting my guys out on the table in the next, hopefully sometime in 2021. We need John to come up here and run another tournament at a big major event.
I would love to do that, Mitch. You know that.
I know. So, you know, one of the things that, as you guys move forward with all these games, when tournaments start happening again, how are you guys looking at getting folks out of the house? Or you just think they're going to come running to come play it at gaming stores and events? It's a softball question, guys. I got to ask a few.
It's I think folk are just going to be desperate to get out there, and they're going to be looking for new people to organize things, people who maybe haven't considered it before. So I think we're going to see an explosion when that happy day comes. Whether it'll be a bit of a honeymoon period and then things will settle down a little bit to our normal rates, I don't know, but hopefully we'll give those new guys who are organizing events some instructions through the Warlord Games supported play documents and the community site that's coming up. But as you say, very softball question. I think everybody's going to be desperate to go and see their pals and push toy soldiers about the table and have more fun.
I think you're going to see a lot of small little cons. They're not, you know, we're not going to see big ones for a while, but there's been an explosion of 50 to 150. They're realizing they can do it, and if you do it right and follow the regulations, you can really get them done and bring more people out and show off your new stuff you painted during the great time.
Yeah, that's something I'm looking forward to. So even right now, I got a lot of local game stores because I'm one of John's minions. hey, as soon as things get good, could we start having tournaments? And I'm like, yeah, but right now, to get 4 or 5 people just to show them a demo of Blood Red Skies, because I'm getting asked a lot about Blood Red Skies demos or Bolt Action, just to get it out there to show people. I've been more than willing to do that as long as everybody's being safe. But I think when the floodgates open, we're going to need a bunch of people that can start organizing stuff everywhere because a lot of stores are saying, hey, we really want to run another event as soon as things get good.
And stores are fantastic. And I don't know if I've told this before, but since I've got Andy and you mentioned the same screen, you can see each other. Mitch was the guy that was responsible, Andy, for getting your game into the Pentagon. Oh. So he's the guy. He's the guy that got it, and now it's become a staple in the Pentagon for your game. Which
class.
Yeah. Which kind of leads me to my question that I'd like to ask Andy. I know when you designed and did all the work on Blood Red Skies, you knew it was going to be a killer game and it was going to be fantastic. Because let's face it, folks, you don't come up with crappy games, Andy. You do some good stuff. But what, when you did Blood Red Skies, has surprised you the most since you've developed and made Blood Red Skies?
Go ahead.
Yeah, the thing that surprised me the most is how much the sort of like hardcore historical crowd has taken to it. I thought we'd managed to sort of like maybe piggyback off the fact people liked X-Wing sort of thing, and that was popular at the moment, and Wings of Glory and stuff. So that it was just more of a sort of fun beer and pretzel type game. But with that has come a really hardcore historical flying simulationist sort of like faction who really, really appreciate the game, because it does manage to abstract a lot of things that other games do try to abstract and do it poorly, whereas Blood Red Skies manages to do it well, and you get kind of historical results out of it, which is something I always felt about the game, and I was kind of proud of it, but I didn't think people would actually like cotton onto it to that kind of degree. So that's been a really nice surprise, because it's meant that we've been able to dig in a lot harder on almost the technicalities of it, the different aircraft, different aces and so on, to a level that I never thought would be the case. I thought we'd be doing, we might get away with a late war Spitfire and an early war Spitfire, and that would be about the level of granularity we'd ever get to. But no, we're right there now with differences between Mark 5s and Mark 9s and 14s and all the rest of it. No, you've got this bit wrong, Andy. So that's been a delight. It's been a real, and it's been educational as well. I never had to read so deep into it as I've had to, so it's been good.
One of the things, if I can add, I remember when I was with WWPD and we interviewed John for the first time, and I knew it wasn't going to be the last. He told us about Blood Red Skies, and the question I asked him is, so many people have tried and failed to get a really good World War II aviation game going. What makes this, why do you think this is going to work where all others have failed? And he said, well, Andy Chambers is doing it. And I'm just nodding my head, yes. Because at that time, I wasn't familiar with all the games that you did. But, it actually was a hit. And, I was talking to the Lead Pursuit guys last night also about how the game kind of really has picked up. And one thing to tell you, so when I brought it into work to play with MiGs against Sabres, I had graduated wing commanders, in charge of a couple thousand people, fighter pilots, weapons school grads, because, I do wargaming for the Air Force. And we were talking about whether or not the mechanics in this game reflect what it's supposed to. And they said yes. And they said it's kind of tricky how he does that, because with stuff like you have a tight turn, with the cards, that it really kind of puts that tactical edge, and it's not rock, paper, scissors with different painted aircraft. These planes perform how they did realistically. And I thought that getting that from them, and mind you, yes, we were playing for fun, but I'm also trying to teach them how mechanics work. To get that kind of feedback, I thought was really, really good.
Yeah, it's quite, really, you couldn't ask for a more ringing endorsement than that. And, whenever I design a game, you try and give it big fancy word coming up, verisimilitude, truthiness to its subject matter. And, to what degree you succeed at that, it often with sci-fi and fantasy, it almost doesn't matter. It's more a benchmark to measure yourself against. But once you get onto real life and historical things, it's a very different beast. So to actually sort of like, find that I managed to hit the mark that well is really, it's a very affirming thing to hear, I can tell you. But, it did stem from having to like read the Bible of fighter combat and all that sort of stuff from back when I was doing simulation flying. So it had some grounding in, not the reality, but at least a facsimile of the reality. And reading all the stuff about, G and stress levels and all the rest of it.
Physics is important.
Physics is important, and it's a big factor. And it's I think from an external observer, when you sit down to try and write a set of rules, it's very easy to get lured into the stats and the numbers that you can get on aircraft, because you can get, solid, this one turned faster than that one kind of numbers and all the rest of it. But once you understand the physics of it, you start to understand that's all an illusion. No, it doesn't. Or rather, it does under ideal circumstance. In the unlikely event that the other aircraft is in exactly the same circumstance, it'll turn faster. But that's not really the way it plays out most of the time. But the biggest thing was, putting the stake through my hated enemy of pre-plotted turns.
Well, and some of these things do generate a lot of buzz on Mr. Nat's Ready Room on Facebook, and there's a lot of rabbit holes. We would be remiss if we don't mention Ken Nat, at least, and his boys over there at the Ready Room.
I said there was a special place in heaven for him for the work he's doing. So let me ask all you guys a blanket question, either as gamers or game developers. What is harder to do? What is more important to do? To get the mechanics right that portrays the weapon systems and tactics of the period, or getting the historical detail 100% right? Because you don't see both sometimes on some threads. You see either or. But as game developers, what do you feel is most important, and which one do you feel is a little harder to do?
As a designer, I'm always prepared to step on historical reality to a certain extent to make it feel better, if you know what I mean. Because I'll say there is a great allure, especially these days when it's so easy to research things, in getting into the nitty-gritty historical details of, this machine gun had more bullets and fired faster, therefore it was better, and all that sort of stuff. But I'm a big believer in reading primary source and reading about the thoughts of the guys who were actually, in the war, fighting at that time, using those weapons and so on, and getting their opinion on things. And it doesn't matter to them as much as it does to war gamers, So to a large extent, I'm more interested in things like positioning, in relative stress levels on different units and so forth for how they perform in combat, rather than the, how many millimeters thick their steel helmets are. And I'm being a bit disparaging there, but as I say, it's a rabbit hole that's all too easy to get drawn into when you're designing a game. And I think you have to try and distance yourself from it a little bit and keep your eye on the bigger picture, rather than get obsessed with the nitty-gritty details, because they will lead you astray at some point. Because rules are rules, and rules aren't real life. So, things that you factor that seem really important in the rules because you read about it somewhere in the history books, that isn't, you're probably getting drawn away from actually portraying real life at that point. So I think bolt action's a really good example of this to me, where you just take a little bit of a step back and go, like, well, do we really care whether it's a 47mm or a 54mm gun? What we care about is its characteristics of, is it an anti-tank gun or is it a howitzer, and things like that. And by taking a little bit of a distance from it and judging things on those lights, I think it works better for the system as a whole, rather than things that come from a very kind of like mechanics-based, I say, nitty-gritty numbers all the time.
And
I'm sure. I'm seeing Steve probably had a lot of fun with that when he was riding Bike and Shot.
Certainly from my point of view, it's when you're dealing with things that happened a few hundred years ago, you can do all the research and all the reading, and that can be pretty exhaustive. But at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is create a representation, not a recreation. And the first point is to make a game that people enjoy playing and want to play. And ultimately, the aim of the mechanics is to make the outcomes as realistic as you can. But at the end of the day, it's a game. And the difficulty, certainly I had with the English Civil War, 30 Years' War, is there's a lot of stuff that nobody really knows, 100%. There's a lot of speculation, and you can read into it, and you can even read eyewitness reports, and they'll be talking about the same thing and give two very, very different opinions. And this is all the way down to like what uniforms they wore, if any, because for the longest time people assumed that when they said, "Oh, it was the red regiment," people assumed that was the colour of their uniforms, and usually it referred to the colour of their banners or their standards, not the colour of their uniforms at all. And so at the end of the day, absolute historical accuracy in a lot of cases isn't actually possible. It's much better to create a good game that is representative of the period. That's my opinion anyway.
Yeah, you see.
No,
Not that I've been through quite a few of these conversations before.
No,
because, but the thing is, people get very passionate about their period of history. I do. I get incredibly passionate about 17th century warfare. This amazes some people because if their thing is World War II, they just don't understand. As far as they're concerned, it's people in pajamas.
Right.
Yeah, but those World War II guys will tell you exactly how many rivets are on the outside of that tank and what color you should run.
Yeah, and what I hate is, let's be honest, war gamers are the worst when it comes to criticism. Not taking it, giving it, and remember, we're all war gamers. But it's when a new game comes out, you go. It's always that vocal minority that will tell you everything that's wrong with it, and I'm like,
oh God, yes.
Are you sure that this is the game for you? You seem to have so many problems with it. No, I love this game. Just that it doesn't have this one Hungarian unit that he read a book about somewhere, and it's just interesting how our hobby, I don't know any game developer that's not a hobbyist themselves that doesn't play these games, and it's just interesting how we're very good at complaining, but then when we're designing games, it's like, where is all this flack coming from? It's incredible.
Unlike Andy, who's got a large resume of games that he's designed, my resume for gaming is very small, and it's very specific to that period. So I've never actually got bored or annoyed by those sort of things. I actually find it quite flattering that people care enough that they play the game and they enjoy it enough to actually want to contribute. And that's kind of my first port of reference, is if somebody's contacting me to ask these questions, it's usually because they're really interested in care and not because they want to be difficult. And I'm still in that phase. Call me naive, but I'm still there.
No, it's a really good attitude to have, Stu, because it's true. Because it comes from passion at the end of the day. It's because they're passionate about the subject, and they may disagree with you about how you've handled it and all the rest of it. But at the end of the day, they're passionate. And that's never a thing to think of as being bad. Yeah, there's a difference between anybody who will basically talk to you directly about a game that you've made and people just blowing hot air on the internet. That's the biggest thing you have to learn. But usually the harshest critics that you'll see are coming out because they're disappointed. Basically, they wanted it to be something, more like what they wanted. And I don't hold that against anybody, really. At the end of the day, I got into designing games in the first place because none of them did what I wanted. And that's not fair. Some of them did what I wanted, and that's why I ended up with Games Workshop, because I actually produced some games that kind of like, made me passionate, to the point whereby I went to them and were like, look, I've written stuff for you. Let me write things for your games because I think they're great. And so anybody I see like that, I feel a sort of like brotherly love towards them, really.
How do you guys take or harness the passion from the community and turn that into making better products? Not a lot of game companies do that. And I know Alessio covered it a little bit when we talked about FAQs last hour, but is there a way to harness that for good?
Oh, absolutely. It's been, again, Blood Red Skies has been interesting to me because it is down to me entirely about what I take on board or do not take on board from the community. And frankly, I've always got my ears open. I want to know. And if they're interested in something, then I'll do it. And the biggest thing you get out of it is just these marvelous ideas and people doing it for themselves and so on. And that's something I always try and encourage as well. Because, a good game belongs to the universe. It's not the property of one person or one company. So if they want to do things with it, even if it's off stream from what the main game does, then more power to you. And fostering that kind of community, it is tricky because you need to have your ears open all the time. Because if something festers for even a day or two, then it can turn into a source of conflict between people who disagree with each other about how to handle it and so on. And so you need to always kind of be ready. You don't always need to, but you need to be ready to step in and perhaps make a judgment or say, yeah, you're right, or no, you're wrong, or yes, we should do something about that. And I think that's where the bigger companies fall down on it, because it needs to be somebody's job, 24/7 virtually, keeping an eye out so that they can at least respond to things like this. You see it with the very largest companies now do this. Large video game companies will have a layer of, contact with the community. The problem they have is that the people actually, the community managers are often so divorced away from the core of what's going on that there's not a lot of back and forth. But I don't know. Different companies are different. Some of them are good on this. Some of them are bad. But it is. Sorry, go ahead.
Warlord, I think, is kind of at the moment in a sweet spot in that we're big enough to have a bunch of quite a lot of people who work for Warlord Games across a number of different countries around the world, fulfilling roles such as customer service and social media and looking after stores and whatever. But we're small enough that pretty much everybody who's involved in those roles is a keen gamer who people feel are approachable. And that's quite a good place to be. So that I think that keeps us grounded. So the feedback we get an awful lot of feedback from our customers talking directly to us. And whether that's a phone call through our customer service or whether it's some of the stores and the stores we deal with, they're responsible for most of the demo games that get played through stores. So they feed back to us, what could be better about it, what makes it easier for them to build the communities in their area. And that all gets fed back. And it's not a massive chain to feed it back to. It's big enough that it's accessible. So if somebody wants to do that in Italian or French or Spanish, because it's a first language, that's available. But it's not a massive chain in order to get to somebody who can make a decision.
So a few weeks ago, I lectured at Georgetown University on wargaming, and I put pressure on you guys where I said, look, you have the Peter Perlers, the Ed O'Grady's, which are the staples in operational wargaming for industry, for the DoD, and for companies. And I said straight out, I'm not learning very much from those guys. I'm learning from guys like you that are here on this podcast. And the feedback was, well, because there's a profit motive. And I said, no, there's a passion that you guys play these games. You know what a good game is. And you work with other old grognards that will say, that idea sucks. And the creative process is more artistic. The games become more fun. When I conduct a war game, I don't care if they want to argue the rules. It's my game. These are the rules. But you guys have to be cognizant of that. And I think that is why, personally, for me, I am learning so much from that community. And I said, for all those folks, they need to go out and play hobby games. And I'll put the link here for the chat. But I think what you guys just described is perfect. Why this is where the innovation's happening in wargaming. And I think it's from the processes you guys talked about, because you write about stuff you care about historically. It's always been a passion. And I think it shows in the products. I really do.
Well, and Mitch, to just kick off that, one of the biggest complaints that we get from the people is Warlord Games puts out too many games. We have too many. Too many. Yeah.
You do.
I mean, and I'm sure, 13 years ago when Paul and John sat around his kitchen table talking about creating this game company, they had no idea that in 13 years we'd have 19,000 products on our SKU line. And we have about 15 different game systems. But because we have that passion for gaming, because we want to get those games out to those people that are historical, Warlord gives you a venue to get that idea out. And sometimes that idea will create or generate several other ideas. I mean, case in point, John Stollard's Cruel Seas game. He read a book and he thought this would be fun. And over 3-4 years, he made this game. Well, then that game generated a spark in Gabriel, who, like Steve, Gabriel's a nutter for ancient sail, 1700s, 1800s sail. So then he took some of those rules and he made Black Seas. And then now during COVID, when we were sitting around, people were kind of chatting back and forth, and the boys over at Mantic talked to Gabriel, and now we have Armada. So this one rule set, because one guy read a game, he read a book, John Stoller read a book. Now we've got 3 fabulous fun games to play. Andy mentioned when he was talking that he read a book about air tactics. He's always been a great guy for airplanes anyway. He loves flying stuff. But he read a book and had a passion to create a game that he thought would be fantastic, and he nailed it. So Warlord is a place where people can have a chance to maybe get their idea out into the world and share it with other people.
And why I say it's too many games, John, is one of your raiders of a store. COVID helped me in a way, but they would say, "Can you come to the store and do Gates of Antares?" I go, that's why I'm saying there's too many games. I don't play them all.
I think it's a very understandable criticism, because we do a lot of games. I think where it comes from is the desire and the passion to make these games in the first place. It can come down a whole bunch of avenues, but also we don't like widowing a game. I think we all know about games that we've played in the past and really loved, and the amount of flack that the publishers get when they drop that line, because it then becomes unsupported, and a lot of people don't want to carry on playing for whatever reason, and what they would consider an unsupported game. So you end up in a situation where we don't want to drop any of these games, because a lot of people invested their time and their money and their effort and their passion into collecting whatever it is. Now, that does lead to some interesting business decisions that thankfully our studio have to cope with, is trying to keep everybody happy, because they're the ones who have to come up with a schedule to try and fit it in, to release things on a regular basis for everything across the line. And you're right, we can't do it. We can't do it sensibly for everything. So yes, we have a lot more weighting on bolt action than we do on pike and shot. I understand that. I love pike and shot, but I can understand that there's a lot more people who play World War II. But then we probably, in the last 12 months, haven't released enough plastics for it, which we are going to address over the next 12 months, believe me. And it's an understandable critique, because we've had all these other things in the pipe that we've been doing that we have to support. We have to carry on supporting. So it's understandable, but that's kind of where we are, really. So
let me ask two questions. We still don't have any questions from the field. How to get me to shut up is either Troy tells me to shut up, you guys start asking questions, or John does. So you guys, from the development side, what is one game that you were surprised did as well as it did, and what is one game that didn't hit that you wish would have done better throughout all of the games that you guys produce?
Is that a Warlord?
smile.
Yeah, I was going to say, is that a Warlord question? Because if it's a me question, it's a very different answer.
I'll tell you what. You can answer it however you want, sir.
Okay, biggest disappointment for me was back at Games Workshop doing Epic 40,000. Basically, we transitioned from the Space Marine system, well, Space Marine 2nd Edition, as it was at the time, Titan Legions and all that. And me and Jervis came up with this like beautiful gem-like way of portraying these mass battles with Titans and thousands of guys and tanks and all this sort of stuff all at once. And it was a thing of beauty. It was a thing of beauty from our design perspective, but it didn't do that well. Because it was too different to what had come before. It was too abstract for people, and it just didn't take off. That actually pretty much killed doing epic level stuff for Games Workshop for, well, up until they did Adeptus Titanicus a couple of years ago. So what we thought was a really nice, well-crafted, and we were proud of it, system, and I still am, it must be said. But at the end of the day, it did terribly. It was a bad thing because we misjudged it. We misjudged what the audience was looking for. And that, to a certain extent, comes down to us as individuals, although in our defense, I'll say, it was the 90s, man. It wasn't that easy. You couldn't just go and look at a site somewhere and people would give you their opinion, But that was my biggest disappointment. In terms of things that were taken off more than I expected them to, I don't know, most of them, frankly. 2nd edition 40K, which was my first real big job, and it turned out to be huge and kind of defined, because up until that point, I'd been the epic guy, in effect. I did a lot of work on Space Marine 1st edition, and it's sort of like post-Adeptus Titanicus stuff. That's when I started out. So doing 40K 2nd edition was my first, like, big job, if you will. And it just turned out to be huge. I mean, Games Workshop was surprised by how huge it turned out to be as well. It was just phenomenal. They just ran out of it immediately, reprinted it, ran out of it again. So, and I'll say that kind of defined another, 27 years worth of career for me after that. So that would be the one, I think, overall.
And hence the nickname Archfiend, forever to be stuck behind your name.
Overfiend, please.
Overfiend, that's right, yes.
You can call me Archfiend as well if you like. I don't mind.
Steve, Paul?
I think for me, recently, because I think there's been a case of constant surprises, because I've been with Warlord for so long now. I remember being told quite categorically right at the beginning as we launched Bolt Action that nobody wanted to play 28mm World War II. Everybody who played World War II wanted to play it in different scales. So we were pleasantly surprised when Bolt Action really took off and went well. But in recent years, naval games. Again, because there was a perceived wisdom that, nobody really plays naval games, do they? And that's
aircraft games too.
That's probably true until you release them and actually get people playing them, and then suddenly people play them. So that's kind of been the pleasant surprises. Disappointments, I suppose, again, recently, the fact that for us, Judge Dredd sells far better in the UK than outside of the UK. So trying to come up with a way of encouraging or getting people within Europe and North America to love Judge Dredd as much as we do in the UK.
Yeah, he's not that popular here. But John, the way he demoed it, I bought it.
It's a great game.
It's a great game.
Part of the problem that we had was we had massive production issues right at the beginning, which meant that we couldn't actually cope with what we initially sold anyway, and a lot of those went into the UK, so we never really launched it properly. But that seemed like a missed opportunity. And right now, the fact that Judge Dredd is
I have a solution for you on that one, Steve. There we go, since we're having a staff meeting anyway. Apocalypse War, you should relaunch it with Apocalypse War.
Perfect.
Yeah, because that makes it a lot easier to wrap your head around who's the good guys and who's the bad guys in it. Oh my God, Sov judges, they must be evil and robots. So that might be a good point to relaunch. as it
Well,
were.
it's a beautiful, clean system, and the way that you and Gav and now Roger put that together with Strontium Dog, and then 2000 AD, and hopefully when Slain, that's going to be the whole rebellion. It's such a fantastic book, and what they generate. I love it, and we just got to get that passion. I mean, once you play it with people and you demo it. I mean, I always have the thoughts in my background when you and Gav kicked the shit out of me when we played it and you tested it. But I learned my lessons, and now I know how to play it right. But it is a fun and interactive game, and the ability to do so many different things with it is phenomenal.
The fact that you got me to buy it, and I don't like sci-fi. No, but the fact that I don't like sci-fi fantasy that much. But the game system is so tight that not only did I buy the game, I went out and got a ton of the books. I got an expansion pack. I haven't played it as much as I wished I could have, but I'm always telling stores I'll come in and demo it. Nah, you don't really know. Let me demo it and see what happens. But yeah, I think it's an amazing game system. I think it's fun, has a low model count. And then, going back to what Steve said about naval games, that's a hard community because they have real life rivet counters. And I've worked on some naval games, and if it's not Sea Creek that you play for 12 straight hours, and you don't die from enemy action, you die of boredom. I know the Sea Creek guys are going to kill me, but that is the worst. And I remember when Cruel Seas came out, and I'm on the Naval Wargaming sites. This is a game that nobody ever asked for, and I'm like, okay, and they go, and it's right away the old grogs. And I said, let's see how it does. That's the one I was surprised did as well as it did, just to be honest, just because of that is a rough community.
Yeah, but this is the thing. I like Cruel Seas. I haven't collected anything for it myself, but I kind of want to because it's cool. I mean, one of the attractions for doing Blood Red Skies for me was like, at the end of the day, World War II fighters are cool. They thrash around, massive machine guns and cannons on. They travel at 300 miles an hour. I mean, what more do you want? And the small ship action and so forth. It's just it's an exciting topic overall, and I found it really interesting that they did it. I thought it was a bold move as well, but I think there's an undeniable attraction to it.
Well, and I think Andy's and it made a good point. Besides getting criticized for too many games, we get criticized for not having standard scales. And they always say, it's because you want to sell exclusive models. But the reason why we put 1/300 scale, and John wanted it to be 1/300 scale, was the models are visually appealing. And we're all visual kind of beasties. And a 1/200 scale for aircraft, you get just enough detail, and you can paint it up. Some of the planes I've seen are beautiful, but it's not taking you 5 days to paint that plane, or it doesn't take you 5 days to paint that 1/300 scale. And then we got criticism for the 1/700 scale for Black Seas. But come on, you finish that ship and you have it in your hand. That's a beautiful piece of work.
Can I say something in defense? I'm sorry, Steve. Yeah.
No, I'm guessing that 28mm scale Bismarck might be quite unwieldy as well.
Exactly.
It would. So I do have some questions, but let me just defend that statement. You guys just want to sell models. Yeah. And I want you guys to sell models because I know if you don't sell models, you guys are in a business. That is primarily what you do. That's what feeds all of the other intellectual stuff that you guys do. So when I hear from gamers, they just want us to buy more models, I go, do you want the game to stay around or die?
I think what has to be understood as well is, we have a duty of care to our customers to try to ensure that we can supply them with great products and get them to enjoy, playing our games. But we also have to marry that with having a duty of care to the 100+ people who work for us and actually rely on us to pay their mortgage and send their kids to school. And, they understandably don't necessarily want to work for free. We have to be a functioning, profitable business to employ 100 staff. And in 5 years' time, hopefully employ a heck of a lot more people. That's just the nature of the beast.
I think as well that I'm not coming to this from a point of view of a designer as such. I'm a gamer. But in my dealings with anybody in any company, I've never seen anybody approach a game from the point of view, now, how can we make money at this? I've only ever seen them approach it from the point of view is I'm really passionate about this. How can we spread more fun and joy? And hopefully we make some money along the way. And I think that's universal, almost no matter what company you go to. I'm sure there's exceptions. But in my experience, you know, guys are doing it, as everybody here has mentioned time and time again, because they're passionate about that period in history or that style of game.
Got a question before we lose Andy and Steve here, but did I hear early on that we've got some new Antari stuff in the works coming out? I know we've got a few fans that like the sci-fi stuff over here.
Well, don't mean to jump in on Andy, but next hour, Tim Bancroft will be on and he's one of the major driving forces of the Antari system.
Oh, that's right. Is it Dread and stuff that we're worried about with Andy?
Okay. Yeah, Dread and Slain. He hasn't even talked about Slain.
No, I'm nearly out of time, so I better talk about Slain quick, hadn't I? I got dragged into other things. Okay, well, Slain, we edged towards it anyway by talking about Judge Dredd and Strontium Dog, because it's another Rebellion licensed game from the 2000 AD comic. Slain is their best-known fantasy character, and his catchphrase is indeed "kiss my axe," and he's been around for quite a long time. He's got a good pedigree, just like Judge Dredd and Strontium Dog, Johnny Alpha does. But it's a very different strain, as you might imagine, of stories in the comic strips, because it's heroic, legendary stuff with gods and magic and all the rest of it. So when we came to it, one of the things that we wanted to do was we wanted to use the existing system that we were using for Strontium Dog and Judge Dredd. But we had to make quite a lot of adaptation of that system, as you might imagine, because at the end of the day, the SDJD system is a gunfight system more than anything else, really. And now we were on this point where we needed a heroic combat system where you could fight hand-to-hand against monsters and all the rest of it. Mostly champions versus champions is the big deal, because different champions of the gods are what tend to clash a lot in Slain. So we had to do a fairly extensive amount of redesign and testing, and yet at the same time try and stay as close to the original system as possible. In fact, I went through a big rewrite to drag it back closer to Strontium Dog and Judge Dredd, because one of the things that I started picking up on, again from earwigging on other people's conversations about the game, is like how much they valued the fact that both of those games were the same game. In essence, there's a few extra rules and, obviously different characters in both games, but they both use the same system. And for bears of little brain like we all are, not having to learn an entirely new set of rules to do a different game was a godsend. They love it. And they love the fact that you can cross over and have characters from the different games fight against each other. Now, can't really do that with Slain, but we've tried to keep the fundamentals of the system a lot closer together, and yet give it that sort of like awesome Celtic-y, heroic, legendary, axe-swinging style to it. And I think we've got there overall. It's an interesting one. The biggest thing that we sort of hit on was, instead of the armory cards and like the big meg cards or chicanery cards as you get in Strontium Dog, we use the cards to do a system for boons and feats, like heroic feats, which again you get them in the Slain comic strip, where he'll pull off the salmon leap and leap aboard his enemy's shield and chop them from above and all this sort of stuff. Like named moves like those are quite big in the comic strips, so we've got a way of using those through the cards. And boons, like I say, it's far more summoning the power of the Earth Goddess to do things, or creating Sourland for the evil Droon Lords and all this sort of stuff. So with those things, I think we've actually produced something that's quite interesting, very, very much like Strontium Dog and Judge Dredd, but like I say, spun differently into this heroic fantasy sort of realm. And we've got a core box with the main characters out of Slain. Slain himself, obviously, his sidekick, Uko the Dwarf, and his side chick, Nest, against one of the aforementioned evil Droon Lords and his Skull Sword soldiers. Yeah. really good bad guys in general. And we did a new set of scenarios to go with it, and Gav came up with a really nice little campaign system so that you can actually take on the roles of the different champions of the gods, battling it out over sacred sites and so on to win control. So it's a nice little package overall. I look forward to seeing it come out. That's Kiss My Ags.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Andy. And I see Nelson's back online, so he'll be up for our next hour. So this, I guess, is the last chance for anybody to ask any kind of questions they may have of Andy or Steve before we lose them. This is your last chance to get it from the source, as we say. And then we'll move on soon to Nelson and Chris and Mr. Tim Bancroft for Antares and our new game, Mythic Americas, which is really going to be exciting.
We have one question, and it's from Roland. Any thoughts on a bolt-action French Indochina book? Not sure if this discussion is limited to Blood Red Skies. It's not. And then I asked him, is it World War II or post-World War II? He said post-World War II. So I'll let you guys answer that or not.
Well, that'll fit into the 45 to 1950 where we did with Korea, bolt-action Korea. I don't think, Steve, we have anything online, but that doesn't mean, Roland, that you can't maybe run down that rabbit hole and present something.
Yeah, we've not got anything. There's nothing in the schedule at the moment. As with pretty much everything that we do, if somebody has got a great idea and a passion for doing this, and can actually show that they can put it together, we'll look at it. I think that's where we are. I mean, that's pretty much how most of our historical games have come about, is somebody's come to us and said, I'd like to do this. I feel very strongly about it. And
and supported.
It's anything from the Pike and Shot book through to the Korea book that John did, right through to Black Seas with Gabriel. If somebody's got the drive and the will to do it, then it's a possibility, but it's not in our plans at the moment.
Right, and if it's your passion, support it, show them how it works, and don't write a 1,000-page dissertation, but it's make it the elevator pitch, make it exciting, and I think you really. I'm not saying no, but I'm not saying yes either. So it's one of those. It's up to you.
Another thing to always consider about stuff like that is that a product per se? Is that a book? Is it a interesting web article potentially? Is it a PDF? There's, again, these days we have multiple different ways we can slice things. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's worth thinking of them in, because obviously there's a lot less commitment to do a PDF or a web article or something like that than it is to try and do a full-blown book. And so that's always worth thinking about as well. And potentially that sort of thing, PDF or web article, can be the sort of like the beachhead towards getting to a book as well in the long run, because it can just like open an absolute can of worms of all these other stuff. People come out the woodwork and go, oh, what about this? What about that? And then before you know it, you've actually got the material to do an entire product in its own right. So it's always worth pursuing these things a bit.
Well, that's awesome. So when Troy gets back, we will head into our third hour. Hopefully everybody here, it's funny. I expected guys to pop in and out, not from Warlord, but from the audience, but they're hanging in there with you guys.
There's some hangers on, yeah.
Yeah.
They're asleep.
That's right.
That's right.
But I have to take the last couple of minutes, if you don't mind, folks. To really thank Andy Chambers and thank Steve Morgan. Things are really being crazy, and I really appreciate you letting us have an hour of your time. And I love it when the people can actually get the answers from the people. And I never thought Andy did. No, Steve did. It's fantastic that Warlord tells people where it comes from, and it's one of the reasons. Thank you, guys.
Brilliantly said. We didn't hear most of that. I did.
It sounded passionate, though.
We got the general gist of it. Thanks a lot, John. And guys, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Steve and Andy.
I'll sign off too. Brilliant talking to you guys again today. You thank me for these sort of things, but I should thank you because I do value these opportunities to communicate and
Thank
hear
you
from
very much.
what they find important. So, love you. Thank you. Bye.
I'm going to try to figure out what the heck's wrong with my computer and stuff because I keep freezing. It's not going to be much fun.
It's really good for the rest of us.
I'm glad he got in there before I did, John.
Yeah.
Well, and of course now
before me.
That's right.
Turn up sometime.
I'm sorry. I'd like to welcome on deck now. We've got Nelson Martinez and Chris Remitz, Father Time and Lord Mortis, if you know them online. They're the folks that were the driving force behind our new and fantastic game, Mythic Americas. And also later on, hopefully will be joining us Tim Bancroft, who is the man, the myth, the legend for anything and all things Gates of Antares. Gentlemen, welcome aboard.
Thanks, John. It's good to be here. I don't know if you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Good.
Indeed.
Okay. Well, thanks for the invite.
And Tim is on, so make sure to have Tim on mic, and if he wants to go ahead and go with his video so people can see who the magic man is behind all things Antares.
Okay, let's get started on Mythic Americas since we've got Nelson and Chris here. I was a big fan of Warlords of Erewhon from Rick Priestley, and I heard you guys on several podcasts recently, and you guys were talking about taking Warlords into the biggest area that people complained about Warlords, which was there was no fluff. There was no story. It was just generic. So why don't you tell everybody what exactly Mythic Americas is and where you're going to take it across the world?
Okay, so do we have about 6 hours?
Nutshell.
Okay, nutshell. So a very tiny nutshell. So I would like people to imagine a sort of slightly out of shape guy, maybe in his 50s, walking down some park and seeing this gorgeous, woman and falling in love immediately, right? Because that's what happened with and then it turns out that you have a bunch of stuff in common, and that's what happens between Mythic Americas and Warlords of Erewhon. So my buddies and I, Chris being one of my buddies, we've been playing Warlords of Erewhon, and we've also been working on Mythic Americas, this project for about 12 years. Myself, when I started this project way back when, and really enjoying Warlords of Erewhon, realizing and agreeing with you and that it was lacking a background. So for us, the background was everything that we were doing with Mythic Americas. So the long and the short of it is it was a perfect match. Saw each other across the park, fell in love immediately, and realized that it was just they were just really good fits for each other. The background that we've developed for Mythic Americas is just one of it's just a portion of a much larger background, which we can get into during the rest of the conversation. So it's very, very deep, and it involves an enormous amount of background resources and fluff and mythology and history and our own creations, and the game is so solid as far as we're concerned. It really is. It's just as a rule set, it was just perfect for what we were trying to do. So we had this crazy idea. Jon Russell, who's we have a little statue of Jon Russell, and we sort of bow to it every morning. And so he said, that's a great idea. We should go to the UK and pitch it to the guys. And so we got on a plane, went over there, pitched it. Everybody, I thought, enjoyed it. And then, the rest is us trying to make some kind of history, good or bad.
So Mythic Americas is the Warlords of Erewhon platform brought into literally the mythology of the Americas, North and South America. And you've built a new system with that rule set that allows players to field forces from Incas, Aztecs, Maya. I think I said that right.
Yeah, you did.
Yes.
And the native tribes that we would know as Native Americans.
Right.
So the tribal nations. The fluff you've brought into the game is that's the setting. So what are people, especially that are used to the European style elves and dwarves, etc., what are they going to find familiar? What are they going to go, aha, that's different but unique?
Right.
Tell us a little bit about the game design perspective. What does the game offer to people that are used to the elves and dwarves and undead?
So yeah, there's a fascinating universe, collection of universes out there, which have always been intriguing to me as having been born and raised in South America and Latin America and Colombia and Venezuela. It's always sort of been part of my culture. This idea of the mythology of the Americas, not just South America, but Central and North America, right? So the point of view of a lot of this mythology so far, in my opinion, has always been very Eurocentric, right? So very focused from the outside in, looking in at these cultures in many ways, which is, perfectly understandable. It's studying these cultures. But if you start looking from the inside out, there's an enormous amount of wonderful mythology, powerful stories, incredible characters, historical, almost fantasy-based characters, right? And so when I started working on this project, like I said, 12 years ago, I was just fascinated by how much of American culture, not American US America, but just the Americas cultures and mythology, just wasn't out there in the mainstream of our entertainment or of our educational system, of just in general, right? As in context of our everyday lives. There's stuff here and there that you see, and it's, I think, bubbling up more under the surface. So that background has been a passion of mine for many, many years, right? And it's been a project called Mythic Americas, like I said, for 12 years. That project really started taking shape when I started writing a novel 3 years ago around this idea of Mythic Americas. And around that time, we also discovered, a couple of years ago, we discovered Warlords of Erewhon, right? So I'm going to give you a little bit of a background of what Mythic Americas is. Mythic Americas is 1 out of 5 books, which will be part of this collection under these sort of mythical worlds. And the idea is to create a series of universes with the underpinning of the Warlords of Erewhon rule set that are going to cover a sort of world-spanning conflict that's going on between two forces, which are our sort of fluff creation forces, which are the ever-changing and the ever-living. Okay, so there's a background to this that we've created, which we created based on our understanding of the commonality of a certain theme in a lot of these various cultures, which is this idea of balance, right? So balance in all things in life. And so balance is an underpinning of the fluff. These two forces are the two that are vying for balance. And you'll see more, as we get into the story, you'll see that that balance and that idea drives something that's very important to us from the point of view in the game. And that is that there's no good or evil in our game, right? Human beings can be either or, anytime, or at the spur of the moment, right? as we all know from history in our own lives. So in this game, there's no good or evil. There's simply an eternal balance, a search for balance that we as humans are kind of caught in the middle and are participants in this story, right? There's an important reason why we chose to represent this without the idea of good or evil. We didn't want anyone to sort of select a warband like the Aztecs, for example, and say, well, they're evil because they're using undead, right? And the reason we don't want any kind of good or bad painted onto any one specific faction is because we want to be respectful of the cultures that are at the core of these warbands, right? So if we said the Aztecs were evil because they were using zombies, we would really be doing a terrible misdeed to the history behind why the Aztecs were so fascinated by death, right? Most people don't understand why the fascination with sacrifices, human sacrifices. At the core of that, there was a belief, a religious belief by the Aztec that they were really fighting dark forces and that they had to do these sacrifices for a number of real world reasons, like, saving humanity was really why one of the reasons why they sacrificed. So from our point of view today, we can say that's evil, but that wasn't evil to them, right? So that's one of the background setting or sort of knobs that we put to make sure that we regulated how we represented these various factions. Does that make sense?
It does. Dig into the game mechanics a little more, and if I remember right, Chris might have been a little more involved on the game design. If somebody's coming out of a generic Warlords of Erewhon background and they pick up the Mythic Americas book,
which is beautiful,
you've taken all the rules, errata, FAQ, applied them to the rules of Warlords of Erewhon. What are they going to find different within that from the for lack of a better term, the campaign of Mythic Americas?
I'll drop it. I'll give it to Chris in a second. So we've taken the rule book, and it's not. We didn't want to change anything from the point of view of the actual rules. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? But what we did was we added a level of that we also felt the rule system would benefit from. We spent a lot of time and effort developing the scenarios and the way you play scenarios within the game, so that the reason I mentioned this balance idea before and these two factions is because they're actually inherent and part of the underpinning of how we wrote these scenario rules. So that's how we took the mythology and the myths and the background of Mythic Americas and layered it into and created a balance, I think, between that and the game mechanics. And so that's why I bring up that sort of background on the balance. But scenarios are a big part of this. So Chris can now take it away. Chris, you look like you're looking for something.
No, there were dogs barking, so I just slammed the door on them. I think, first of all, as Nelson points out, Warlords of Erewhon, the rule set itself, if you know it, you can walk right in and play Mythic Americas. The changes that we made were, and we purposefully wanted to do that. We wanted, first of all, the rules were solid, the mechanics were solid, and we wanted to leave them as unchanged as possible because we were adding a layer of fluff onto it, but we also, in order to support these ideas like ever living and ever changing, we added layers of new mechanics over top of it. They aren't groundbreaking from a rules perspective, but they are very different in how you play the game now, because one of the things we wanted to inject into the gaming mechanics was the idea of objectives in play, so that there were ways that you could score victory points above and beyond just kind of killing your opponent or the opponent's troops. And we also wanted to support the themes of the individual factions, tribal nations, Inca, Aztecs, and how we built them out. It was important for us to keep those themes. And then we had to support the ever living and the ever changing. So I'm thrown into all of these different variables. And the way we approached it was to, one, rewrite the scenarios, write our own scenarios that were objective based. Two, from an ever living, ever changing, now that starts being injected into your army building. Again, it's not a matter of building a good or a bad army. You're just taking two different paths. And the way we look at ever living was kind of a nurturing base, and the way we looked at the ever changing was kind of a disruptive base. So if you're building an ever changing army, the spells that you would be taking The options for secondary objectives would be different, and ultimately we have a new mechanic that is called the Blessings of the Gods that allows you to play cards that once around, it's kind of like a cheat, right? So it gives you, as an ever living or an ever changing player, a way to bend the rules just for that one moment. And what we found was, one, the objectives added a layer of strategy that was fun, and that the blessings added just some disruption, not to overuse disruption for ever changing, but to the game. So aside from that, Warlords of Erewhon is the same game. So, there's no changes to the things that we love about Warlords of Erewhon, like pulling dice for activation, that the movement, the magic, none of that's changed. The spells are different, but that doesn't change the game that much. That answer your question, Troy?
It did, and brought up a follow-up question for people like me that I love my my vampire counts and my elves and orcs. Is there thought of retrofitting your new mechanics back into the generic side of it for those of us that went, "Ooh, that's cool, but I want to play with my orcs"?
Honestly, I don't see. I mean, first of all, we didn't test our factions against the book factions, right?
Okay.
So anything can happen. But what we did do was we fully embraced Rick's point system, so that they should be pointed appropriately. Now, if you wanted to bring in orcs and say that they were going to play, we won't say ever living for the orcs, okay? We'll just say ever changing. If they wanted to play an ever changing game, there's no reason they couldn't. I don't believe that the blessings or the scenarios or the secondary objectives, I don't believe any of those things are really specific to the factions, right? They're just specific to the game mechanics. They may sound very, North or South American, but they're still just objectives in the games that orcs could certainly try and obtain. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. So Chris is 100% right. We did not test orcs versus Maya, right? Or dwarves versus Incas. We did use Rick's brilliant pointing system, so we think we've sort of achieved that balance. I think that's a community ask, to ask people to start participating in testing those factions, versus the existing factions. Now, part of the fun for us, for Chris, myself, and the Silverbacks, which is the sort of writing team behind all the factions, is that, we have 5 books coming out, right? This first Mythic Americas is the first one. And there's going to be 8 factions in Mythic Americas alone, right? And then 6 to 8 factions in all of the other Mythic books. So playtesting against all of those factions will be interesting. I actually anticipate that people will do that on their own anyway, because, like Chris says, none of the rules from Warlords of Erewhon have been changed drastically in any way. We did pull out some of the sections from Warlords of Erewhon, artillery and chariots, for example, and we pulled out the majority of what we refer to as the generic spells. Now we're going to make those available on the Mythic Americas website, and I'm sure on the Warlords website, those specific pages, so that if you want to basically use the Mythic Americas book as your standard Warlords of Erewhon book with those additions to play your current factions, you can, because it does have all the Mythic Americas book does have all the rules updated as per Rick's FAQs, like you mentioned, Troy, and earlier on. So I'll explain a little bit as to why we took those out. We took them out because we felt that they weren't necessarily part of the background that we were in, canons, for example, in the time period that we were in. But we are reintroducing those rules via the factions, via the warbands. So instead of having a whole section for chariots, there are some very cool units that are coming out that will use the chariot rules. That's actually one of my most favorite units, which I forced Father Time to put into the game.
Inuit sled dogs.
No, not
Hey.
sled dogs. No,
Sorry.
not sled dogs, but much cooler than sled dogs, with much bigger beasties pulling the chariots. So that's how we're going to introduce those rules. Obviously, when we introduce things like conquistadors, they did have black powder weapons. So we'll introduce the rules. It was just also a way to simplify, streamline the book as well a little bit, in order to make room for, I think, these really well thought out scenarios and the blessings. The one thing that I think we should mention before we move on the scenarios is this idea that before you start a game of Mythic America's Warlords of Erewhon, you are randomly told by the gods, basically, whether you're going to be playing Ever Living or Ever Changing. So it's not a choice unless you decide with your buddy that you both prefer to play one or the other. So by adding this element of randomness from the very beginning, right before you build your army, before you put it on the table, we're trying to create a help encourage people to not build, meta-based armies that will always sort of win. The scenarios then are two-layered, right? You have a primary and a secondary scenario. So you start off by not knowing whether you're going to be ever living, ever changing. That affects two things: your spells, and it affects the blessings of the way, which are these, like Chris says, these cheats. So those you can use during the game, but it depends on what alignment you happen to be, ever changing or ever living. That's a random choice, right? And then your primary scenarios are both to be played by whatever faction you're under, ever living or ever changing. And your secondary scenarios are based on what alignment you have. So there's a layer of things that it's actually very simple and within the game, but it encourages you that you build balanced armies, that you come in with a balanced force, because you don't know what the combinations of those various random events are going to be. You don't know what alignment you might be playing. You don't know what primary scenario, which is also a random choice. And you don't know what secondary scenario you might be playing, which is also a random choice. So you need to show up with a force that's going to be able to handle these various random aspects of your scenarios.
And one thing that may not be clear is that the units themselves can be ever living or ever changing. There's no, like, a Wendigo is not an ever changing beast. It's a never living or an ever changing beast. It can play either role. So that making those random choices at the beginning of the game don't affect your army building per se. So you spend all that time working on your point structures, working on, what kind of special options you're going to pay for. You don't come to the game and then have to scramble because you've all of a sudden become an ever living and you were expecting ever changing. So that's makes it easy, quite frankly.
Yep.
Well, I was the guy that wrote the piece on your book for No Dice, No Glory. And as I was reading through the book, I really liked the layering of the scenarios, the blessings, the
Devotions. Yeah.
Those elements added a lot to Warlords that Rick didn't put that level in because he was trying to go for the generic. That's what Erewhon is. It's nowhere backwards. You guys have made it specific. And if I understand correctly, the Americas is only the beginning. Can you talk a little bit about where this is going to go and what's next in the pipeline?
Yeah, so I get all kinds of excited about this stuff, right? So it's so Mythic Americas, and I think by the time it's probably a good time to just kind of lay out the 8. You want to lay out the 8 factions for Mythic Americas before I jump into the other books?
Well, in December, obviously, we're going to be bringing out the tribal nations and the Aztecs. Those are the 2 starters, and then they're going to quickly be followed by the Inca and the Maya. So that should all be released the beginning of next year. So you start with the two factions that are on pre-order right now, and then we add the other two later. When we get into the summer, and these are factions that are in design right now, we're going to be introducing the Inuits, representing that Arctic flavor, with muskox, I hope.
Yes.
That's so he may want a special chariot, but I want those darn muskox. And also the Taino, which is our Caribbean representation in the game, which is very different. I don't think, heck, I didn't even know what Taino was before we started doing the research on some of this. And then we have two more factions. You want me to talk about those, Nelson? Because they're they're still kind of being sketched out. They're on the whiteboard, so to speak. But we're going to do another representation from South America that right now we're calling the Amazonians. It could be the Carib, it could be, but we want to get that flavor of tribes and, poisons and all that kind of stuff that that happens. There you go. That happens down in that Amazon basin. And then finally, we're going to do another North American indigenous, American Indian faction that's going to be on the other side of the Mississippi, which we're right now calling the Plains Nations, where, now keep in mind, they shouldn't be, although we can change our minds at any time. We don't expect them to be like those horseback riding, big feathered guys, because we're still working on the same pre-Columbian time era. And they just didn't have horses then, but they had buffalo. So we'll be able, maybe we'll ride buffalo across the plains, but we'll see. I mean, it's very early, and we're really just doing a lot of research on them right now. And it's really hard. It's hard to pick, especially when you're trying to look at the indigenous Americans. There's just so many tribes that have such deep culture history. Yes. I mean, and you look at any map, because I do all the time, that shows the tribes of North America, and it's just peppered. There's just too many. So we're trying to do our best to represent various tribes and various nations, sticking to the history as best we can, but also creating fun and maybe a little different spin on what we're used to thinking about with these different American societies and cultures.
And we're all gamers, obviously, and Chris and I used to play Warhammer Fantasy, another Rick Priestley wonderful game, for years and years, and we can tell you lots of funny stories, as I'm sure everyone who's played any of these games for all the years that we've been around playing these games. But the thing that always struck me was how many elves, how many dwarves, how many orcs, how many dragons, how many ogres, trolls, knights versions can we see, and so which is great. Don't get me wrong. I used to play Bretonnians and I used to play vampire accounts. Those are my two things. That's why my nickname is Lord Mortis, right? From all those years ago. But what I thought there's got to be a whole nother toolbox out there that we just have not explored. So our jobs, and I think I've said this a few times in other podcasts, but the idea is we want the game to do a bunch of things. One of them is to give all of us gamers that intellectual itch to go find out things about, for example, some of the nations just in North America. There are dozens of them. The confederations and the nations you're talking about mythologies and histories that go back thousands of years that most of us would struggle to describe. Same thing with the Aztec, the civilizations and the various groups in South America. We're all familiar with the Incas to some degree, and there's some historical gaming around the Incas and the Aztecs and the Maya over the years, but there's just so much more to delve into. And so that's really Mythic Americas, and the other mythic books really also want to do a second thing, which is to bring out these less popular, quote unquote, cultures and make them front and center as well, because they're just as powerful. They have just as many historical characters that are just as, I think, important from a human history point of view as any Viking hero or any European, king, or any Chinese dynasty. A lot of the big major historical cultures got to write the history. Lots of the thousands of other cultures that are under that history, I think, deserve a good look by the rest of us. And there's just amazing, wonderful stories to tell from those worlds. So that's part of what we're trying to do with Mythic Americas.
Got a, if I can, John, let me jump in, and then this will probably go to you anyway. The question come in from Phil. He wants to know that a lot of what you guys are talking about seems kind of nebulous right now because they don't have the book in hand to see it. Are there how-to videos planned? Are you guys going to do some stuff in studio and get that out, how to play? And then John, talk a little bit about release timeline and where else this game is going.
Okay, so the answer is yes to that. The first question with regards to, we're going to, unfortunately, people are going to be stuck watching Father Time and I play the first series of games.
Exciting, that will be.
Yeah, baby. So we set up our studio at the Mythico Minis offices. Literally, it's now complete and ready for us to start kind of streaming the battle reports. We will start with something that actually some of us here on this call are involved in, building our own armies and playing our own games online, right? So we will be supporting it with weekly either podcasts or streams of battle reports, because I think it's important. Also tactical articles on the mythicamericas.com website and the Warlord Games website. Look, we have 5 books, so we're planning to support this for the next 5 to 10 years. Before John sort of jumps in, and I wanted to sort of finish where these books are going. This lore is of the ever living and the ever changing, and this idea of balance starts and it's introduced with Mythic Americas. It then goes to Mythic Asia, which will get a similar treatment under this balance approach. We then do Mythic Africa, and then Mythic Europe right before we finish with the 5th book, which is Mythic Earth. And Mythic Earth is kind of the tome that really sort of brings in and polishes all of the various rules and factions from each of these books. So it's a mammoth endeavor for the design team because it's 6 to 8 factions per book, all under this amazing rule system. We think the rule system can sustain it, and that's why we don't see any reason why the community can't start testing things like orcs and goblins and elves and dwarves and all that, because frankly those are all part of European mythology anyway. So anyway, that was to finish that first.
Let me just jump in 1 second, Nelson. I just want to do a quick plug for the Mythicast, because if there are people who are really interested in getting deep down and dirty in the game before they get the books in hand, that's probably the most detailed discussions, because Nelson and I get on that podcast. That's our Mythico Studios podcast, and we're actually bringing in the designers. We just spent the last 2 podcasts talking strictly about tribal nations with one of the designers for tribal nations. So we talk about everything: stats, units, how to play them, spells, list design, everything. And we're about to start going to that same level of detail with the Aztecs. So
where can they find that Mythicast?
Well, that's what I was going to kind of jump in on with the thing that Nelson referred to was going to be the story of the 5 adventurers. It follows along something I'm sure some of us are familiar with, but we have a place on Facebook. If you just look for Mythic Americas, you'll find that group page that Paul did a great job setting up. And there's also, Chris has set up a Discord channel that you can go to, and all those links will be there. We've put the links to all the myth casts and all the other casts, like when Matt Schreiber from Rocky's War Room went in there and talked to Nelson and Chris. He did those things and put it on there, along with, of all places, Lead Pursuit, a aircraft-based podcast, talked with Nelson and stuff. So they've got some interest there. And I would be remiss to say that when we speak of places to find things on the internet, one of the biggest and best places that to this day has still wowed me, and I'm going to introduce, along with the person who helped create that, Mr. Tim Bancroft, and the Intel, or the oh my God, I just lost the name of the site, Tim, the Nexus. And Tim Bancroft is here to talk about the game that generated the game that Nelson and Chris are talking about. All this idea for Warlords of Everyone came from that wonderful, fantastic game, Gates of Antares. And Tim is here to talk to us about that. And I think it'd be remiss if we didn't let Tim talk about what's coming up with, because he gets inundated with, what about what's coming up for Gates of Antares? And Tim, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, certainly do get inundated with those. It's been absolutely great actually listening to the Mythic Americas team actually talk about it, because the Warlords of Erewhon, the whole Gates of Antares engine really is geared up towards objective games, scenarios, and all the rest of it. And that's where it works best, actually. That's one of the things that cropped up in version 2. We had some people saying, we're not over keen on this shoot 'em up and kill 'em thing all the time. And you had to turn around and say, well, actually, the engine's not designed for that. It's designed for scenarios. It's designed for objectives. And it's great to see that's like taken on board by the Mythic team. And overall, I think exploring it into this whole Mythic Americas background is fantastic. We're actually seeing something outside the normal European take-up, which is wonderful. Really, really great. So, all I can say to Nelson, everybody, is just congratulations, guys. Well done. It's really great to see. Really nice take on it.
Thanks, Tim. And I'm looking forward for what you're doing with Antares. I'm telling you, I'm a big fan of the game. So I'm so psyched that you're that the next one. I want to hear all about it. When is the next version of Antares out?
Excite Nelson, Tim, go.
Right, excite Nelson. I'd love to, but when's the next version of Antares due out? Should have been a month ago, were it not for COVID. Yeah, it's we'd basically what we've done with Beyond the Gates of Antares is we've written all the rules for version 2. We've play tested all the rules for version 2. They've been really thoroughly play tested across the world, which is fantastic. I've written all the new. I've written about 7 or 8 faction books, handbooks, which were intended to go out with the army boxes for version 2. And then COVID struck and I got put on furlough, which means I can't work. And obviously, as everybody knows, retail orders dropped through the floor. And whilst Warlord's doing very well, and as can be seen by the Mythicos studio stuff as well there, I think, we've basically had to put all of version 2 on hold. So I cannot tell you any dates about when version 2 is coming out, which is a real big disappointment. What I can do, though, is sort of like go into some of the things and the processes of which we actually went to rebuild it and give some idea of what's actually in it.
And if I may add, you have huge fans for Antares here at Mythicos, and we've been
wonderful.
We've been, John will tell you this, but we've been quietly, very politely, which is very unusual for us loud, obnoxious Americans. We've been behind the scenes pushing to help in any way, whatever it is that you guys need for us to be involved, to help get the game back out there and screw COVID, because it's just a great game. It needs to hit the shelves, and I'm dying to start doing some stuff. We actually have a bunch of ideas that we should talk to you about as well, but
Yeah,
huge fans.
Please do. You know, you've got my email and all the rest of it. That'd be great. Just send them in. I can't work on anything at the moment, and I'm not supposed to appear on this unless it's purely voluntary, and I'm quite happy about doing so. So this is me not working, talking about it. Which is...
Please go.
Great job volunteering, Tim.
First question is going to be, what is Gates of Antares? Fill in the uninitiated like me. I know what it is because of my role with the blog and with John, but I've never played it. What is it?
Beyond the Gates of Antares is a just above skirmish level game, fundamentally using some of the techniques from the bolt action engines. You've got the order dice mechanic, which Eliseo created, which is absolutely fantastic. But what's happened is it's been switched into a science fiction setting, which really is a sort of futuristic science fiction setting as projected from now, with all the knowledge we have about the technology we have now and where it could go in terms of nanotech and all the rest of it, into a future where people are either in idyllic bliss because they're in some form of post-industrial area where it's an era of plenty, or they're actually fighting for their lives because they're defending their planets against all sorts of odd raiders who can actually easily get to their planets. So one of the core mechanics of Beyond the Gates of Antares are the bolt action mechanics, except with D10. It's been extended because the D10 it's the D10 use of the D10 rather than D6, which has enabled that. It's enabled a much broader range of weapons. So you have mag weapons, you've got chemical weapons, you've got energy weapons and all of that sort of stuff. And it's also allowed a much broader range of people. So you've got pan-humans, slightly upgraded humans. You've got pan-human phenotypes, who are the Boromites, who are big, bulky miners, or the Algorin, who are people who have adapted to radiation zones, and they're a really militaristic Roman-like society. It has to be Roman-like society because that's Rick's speciality in university, I think. and on top of that, you've got loads of drones and loads of vehicles as well. So it goes up to having a few I don't know what you could say, tanks on the table as well. So it's like bolt action in space, except it's a much broader interview that is a much broader perspective than that. But what really makes it different, I think, is the setting. So it's not a grimdark setting. So Rick went totally away from his previous 40K. And it's a setting where you have got lots of nanospore involved, and all the nanospore get together and take over a nanosphere. And then you've got intelligence overlaid on top of that. So the two great nations actually have intelligent nanospheres, which cause all sorts of things to happen in the background, if you see what I mean. So for me, it's that sort of background where you've got those perfect environments of the two great Imtal nations, who are called the Senatex and the Concord, and then you've got all these lesser nations like the Algorins and the Gar Empire, and we'll come on to those. The Gar are little gribbly, pathetic people, really, and we'll come on to that in a minute. And they're all bubbling together in this cauldron of an area on board this huge intergalactic machine, which creates wormholes which enable you to travel across space. So effectively, Beyond the Gates of Antares says, all right, we can't go faster than light, but sometime in the distant past, we had sorry, I'm just getting broken up by the noise. Sometime in the distant past, we had a civilization, the Gate Builders, who created a huge, vast engine which we see as the star, the gas giant Antares, and that creates all these wormholes into all these different planets and systems across, sorry, I should say systems, not planets, all these different systems across space, and not just across space, but also across time as well. So you can go to Antares through a gate in your own system, you travel across the surface of this giant star effectively, drop down into another gate, and then you're in a completely different system, which means that it offers loads of opportunity for players to tailor their own environments, their own games, their own systems, and that's, gives players massive scope to have their own terrain, set up their own backgrounds, set up their own armies, and all the rest of it. And in a rather big nutshell, that's what Antares is. If you want more info, I would say that one of the best places to go for is the Antares Nexus, on which there's massive amounts of information. I've just given the link to everybody. Now, on that, it's a sort of more like a knowledge base than anything else. So you'll see on there all the background, a load of background to Antares, but you'll also see free downloads such as army lists, rules updates. You'll see the living errata, living FAQ, any rules amendments which have actually gone on. I'm not sure if that answered your question or if that over answered the question.
Covered in spades, I think.
And the link is gatesofantares.com for those who watch this later. I don't know if they'll get the chat window or not on this. So second edition is coming. We don't know when. Is that correct? Just at some point in the future?
Yeah, we really don't know when. We've had to, because I've been effectively laid off, though it's not, it's under UK government rules. A furlough scheme means that I get 80% of my salary, but I must not work. Mm-hmm. I can voluntarily work if I want to, or voluntarily do some things if I want to. And I do, like this, of course, but I mustn't do anything that's actually associated with sales. And effectively what it's meant is that version 2 has been put on hold, because really, obviously, what we want to do is actually launch it in conjunction with all the retailers as well. So, it's a bit disappointing because it was all ready to go, but hey ho, by the time we kick it off again, though, I'll be able to go back and write loads of what would be the Antares equivalent of the old Warhammer codexes. And that's one of the things I've been working on. So I've already written one, I'm on another, but we've all got these little free PDF handouts which will give all the backgrounds and all the factions anyway for version 2.
So I would like to say, Tim, we've got about 14 minutes left. Maybe you can help the people who do play Antares now. What can they expect to see in the new version?
In the new version is much the same as the old, but it's been streamlined, smoothed out. No, smoothed out is a better way of doing it. When we started writing version 2, what we found was that before we did it, I'd collected all the issues that had cropped up on the Imtel page, the Facebook Imtel page, and which we'd had sent to us as messages. We'd also got all the facts. We'd also got all the errata we'd had to produce, and we've got the rules amendments. So what we did was actually I assembled all of those into a list, and then Rick and I went through the whole lot to actually see what we could do. But one of the key things, though, that people who play Antares absolutely love it. The biggest issue, though, they complain about is that the rule book is difficult to get into, and it's not laid out as intuitively or as easily as they wanted, and it can be difficult finding out what you want. So what we've done is completely rewrite the rule book, but kept almost all the same mechanics. If you play version 1, you can jump into version 2. Obviously, we've had some experience from games like Warlords of Erelon, from the rules for Warlords of Erelon. So that's fed into some of the stuff. But the critical thing is that it's the same game. At the core, it's the same game. All we've done is get rid of the bits which people don't want. And we've even got a little extract somewhere in the rules, a little call out which says, if you want to add these back in, then I'm sorry, Paul, it might be a good idea if you mute. Is that coming? I don't know who's that coming from. Might be a good idea if you mute yourself. Yeah, thanks, mate. Excellent stuff. What's happened is that we've followed all the advice and all the requests which we've been given. So we've tidied up all the bits which players complained about, but we've kept to what the players asked was version 1, but better and smoother. And that's what version 2 is. So there's one or two things which are changes. So we've slightly changed the way that critical hits have been done, for example. We've tidied up the drone rules. And the points values aren't so critical. So we've divided the points values effectively by 10 and given points to order dice, which is actually quite important in a game like Bolt Action or Antares. But otherwise, it's just a smoother, faster, slicker game engine, and I think it's absolutely fantastic. It's very difficult for me now going back to version 1. So that's the first thing we've done. The second thing we've done is actually followed up on what a lot of people have been asking for, including a lot of the retailers, which is to actually enhance the difference between each faction. The thing is, in version 1, every single faction fights differently. You can't use the tactics that you use for Concord, who are a ranged army, for the Boromite, who are a close in, let's beat up the opposition sort of army. However, it's not immediately obvious, and people used to look at it and think, well, what's the difference? You know, they seem to be the same. So what we've actually done, though, is using the army lists and actually the options available to each squad and all the rest of it, we've tidied that up and made it blindingly obvious what the army is, and we've given more advice as to what each army can actually do. And one of the ideas is that if we can, we'll produce some basic army packs which highlight and emphasize what that army is good at. So you'll get a Boromite pack which has got some really good close order stuff, and you'll have a Concord stuff which has got loads of drones and ranged infantry. You'll have an Isaurian pack which has got some Sanra, who are fantastic on table fighters if you ever get them. So that's where we're going with version 2. Some of the rules changes are actually up on the Nexus. I think they're on competition rule changes, but you can just search for it on the Nexus to see where they go. But they're the rule changes which we use for our game stays. It's called game stay rule mods, and some of those are the sort of things which we're adding into version 2. So we're tidying up some of the res factors, stat changes for some of the weapons and shooting. But overall, the game, I'm really excited about it. I think it's great because it's so slick, it's so smooth compared to version 1, and it's just wonderful, I think. But hey ho,
I think, Tim,
that's why I work for it.
Yeah, well, Tim, and I think what was amazing to me when we started this whole process of doing this to Antares was the complete openness that you and your team and what Warlord did by putting this stuff up on the Nexus. We actually involved the community from the get-go, and the response from the community has been fabulous. And I think it was really unique in the gaming system how you embraced and the huge openness of not trying to hide anything or playing the I got a secret game. You guys put it out there in the open for everybody to put life and breath into, and I gotta commend you and the team for that. It was fantastic.
Yeah, excellent, thanks. And we've got some really great protesters, I have to say. I don't know if anybody listening, but they've been from what we tried to do. My background was in testing, major top-end systems testing. So I brought that to the playtesting. So what I've tried to do is actually make sure we've got a broad range of testers behind it. For example, I think Nelson mentioned earlier about the meta. I hate the word meta, but it's something you can't ignore. It's the concepts which a local gaming club uses or which a game has. And I tried to make sure in the playtesting that we actually brought people in from who are purely narrative, who are hard and fast competition gamers who are new to the game, or who are really experienced gamers, or who are really experienced Antares gamers. And what we did was just basically take all the feedback and actually assess it and see how we could actually improve the rules and make sure they were smooth. And the playtesting team, I think, has been absolutely fantastic. It's not the normal Warlord playtesting group, I think. And I think we probably benefited from that as well.
And I think we didn't mention, but one of the major, absolutely major changes in Antares 2 is it's now called Gates of Antares. We dropped the Beyond. Is that correct?
I don't know. That's still to be decided. But I always call it Gates of Antares, and I wouldn't be surprised if we just called it GOA as Gates of Antares, simply because beyond the Gates of Antares, BTGOA gets a little bit
wordy,
a bit of a tongue twister, a bit wordy. Yeah, whereas just GOA or Antares works much better. But I've actually really enjoyed working on all the army lists and all the rest of it for version 2. We've actually got somebody who's already created all the battle scribe files for version 2, which is absolutely amazing. And whilst it would be lovely seeing the same thing done for Army Builder, it's the fact that it's actually already there and we're just waiting for version 2 to slip in is, I think, great. The playtesting team have really taken to it. They've absolutely loved it. They've really enjoyed playing it. They've actually really enjoyed, I think, reading the way the rules are laid out now. The smoothness of the rules, having gotten rid of the gribbly bits.
Agreed.
We're on a 5-minute warning to end. Jon Russell, have you got any great news that we haven't covered today we should cover?
Well, I think we've gotten all the major. These last 3 hours have gone awfully fast. I appreciate everybody who's been hanging in there, the diehards. It's obvious that 3 hours probably wasn't long enough to get everything covered. We were just able to scratch the surface. I mean, Nelson and Chris were getting into some fantastic stuff, and then Tim got in there with some fantastic stuff. Andy got into some stuff. I guess what to cap it off, anybody who sees this or goes back and watches this, they can see that Warlord is healthy. Warlord is here. We've got plans. Somebody was talking earlier about not wanting to get into a game because it's not going to be supported. Like Steve said, we don't want to have a game disappear. Yes, we have a lot of games that we play with, but we want to keep them around. With Nelson's idea of a 5-year project, that proves that we're going to be here for at least 5 more years. We've moved into a new facility that's going to help us provide the service faster and better to our customers. We've got people like Tim Bancroft working with us to make sure that the games that we are continuing on are going to be done with care and love, because we are so passionate about these. You can hear the passion in Nelson's voice. You can hear the passion in Chris's voice. And I know that our scene down the road with tournaments is going to be fantastic, because Paul is a fantastic guy to work with, and it's a lot of fun to do. And we've got people in customer service like Max, and we've got people that help design our games like Alessio and Andy. So I think the future is bright for Warlord Games. And well, I just came from our second studio being opened out there with Nelson and the guys. We do have some stores that are Warlord Games, Mythic Studios, or Mythic Studios, Warlord Games, how you like to say it. Those are fabulous areas to go to your community. Remember, we talked about you come for the game, you stay for the community. I cannot think of a better place off the top of my head for communities like what Nelson and his crew have done for the Mythic Studios. If you're in New Jersey, you got to check them out. If not, travel there. Trust me, it's not that bad. New Jersey is a nice place to go to, and they have a great place to go. So we got future plans on expanding for maybe 4 or 5 more. But again, if you provide a place for people to play, they're going to come. And I thank you, Troy and Mitch, for providing us this chance to talk for 3 hours on what's great and to do for Mythic and Warlord Games. And thank you very much.
Thanks, John. Thanks to everyone who participated in our panel today. I'm going to close out the video. We've got about a minute left after that. If you guys want to say your goodbyes, you can. Otherwise, if you want to sign out, head on out. But to close out the video, No Dice, No Glory, and HMGS would like to thank Warlord Games and all the people who showed up today. The video from the session can be found on wherever it is Mitch puts them. He didn't write it in here. You can also visit nodicenoGlory.com message boards to continue the conversation there. I know Warlord Games has their own forum and message board and Facebook pages. The Mythic Americas guys, their stuff is available at mythicamericas.com, gatesofantares.com, warlordgames.com, I believe. So thank you much for joining this session. I'm going to end the video now. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.